Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Finance and Economic Development Committee meeting for the 5th of December. Bienvenue à le Comité des finances et développement économique pour le 5 décembre. If anyone would like to speak to items that are on the agenda, they could fill out a form just under that television screen and hand it to the clerk's office. Declarations of interest, déclaration d'intérêt. Confirmation of minutes, excuse me, adoption de procès verbaux, minutes 32, 7th of November, 2017. Carried. Communications as presented. Office of the City Clerk and Solicitor, Bureau du Greffier, 2018 Operating and Capital Budget Finance and Economic Development Committee. Come back to that. There's presentation and delegations. The next is appointment to Bell's Corners Business Improvement Area, the appointment of Kelly Williams. Carried. Appointment to the Heart of Orleans Business Improvement Area, nomination au Conseil de gestion de la zone d'amélioration commerciale d'Orléans, the appointment of Megan Bellefleur and Doug Feltmate. Not sure. Appointment to the Wellington West Business Improvement Area, nomination au Conseil de gestion de la zone d'amélioration commerciale de Wellington West, appointment of Terry Fitzpatrick. Carried. Corporate Services Department, Hotel and Short-Term Accommodation Tax. We'll come back to that. There's delegations. Item 6, Byward and Parkdale Market Revitalization Program, final recommendations and transition update. Carried. And thank you to Council, well, not Councillor Hume, always Councillor Hume, Peter Hume, for chairing the board. Appreciate it. Information previously distributed, reporting Canadian Coalition of Municipalities Against Racism and Discrimination. So we have the first item, which is the budget, and we have a staff presentation followed by a number of people that would like to speak. We have 6 delegations that are going to speak to the budget. Then Councillor El Shantiri, the Vice Chair of the committee, will move the roadmap motion, and we'll hear from our staff.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and councillors. A very short presentation just to basically orient you to the budgets that are in front of you today. So we'll start with a small overview. You'll then have the public delegations opportunity to pose questions to staff, and then we will go through the actual adoption, the roadmap, and any motions to amend, and then finally recommend the budget for council. So the areas of review for FEDCO are pretty broad. You have not only the governance, which is your own offices, the mayor's offices, and the city manager's office, but you also have all of the shared and administrative services. As you know, we have a centralized organizational structure here, so you have legal, and you have finance, and CREO, and IT, and all kinds of shared services that are in as part of this budget. You will not be approving the IT budget, though. That went to the IT subcommittee and was approved earlier this last week, I think. You also have the O-Train, the construction and the planning component of your new light rail transit as part of this budget. And then you have non-departmental, which is a mix of a number of items that don't align with one department but belong to the corporation as whole. All your capital formation costs, all of your non-departmental specific expenditures and revenues, and all the tax-related accounts. So in total, the operating budget it's a bit, we've broken it into 2 parts because you have all of the revenue here from taxation, you actually come out that it's a positive 1.4 billion. But really, the areas of where there's expenditures in your governance, you have a net budget requirement in 2018 of 40.5 million. For your shared admin services, $153 million. And in non-departmental, you actually have an excess of revenues in the non-departmental compared to expenditures, so you have a revenue contribution of $50 million. Then you add on your taxes, your assessment growth of 1.3%. It generates actually about $20 million. There's about $4 million added onto that, which was revenue that we will receive as a result of a calculation that we do when we do the tax rate. It's the impact of neutral ratios, so we've added that in there as well. And then your property taxes are going up by $32 million, which is the 2% on the citywide levy and 2.5% on the transit. So what's included in the budgets? In the maintained categories, for those areas that actually have expenditures, you've got adjustments for all your potential contract settlements. There is some minimum wage impact here, and that's specifically identified as per your direction. There's also any changes for increments and benefit changes. One of the big changes you have in the budget this year is there's a big increase in the city clerk's department, and that's because you're running an election in 2018. So there is an adjustment of, I think, somewhere around $5 or $6 million that we've added. It comes from your election reserve, so it actually doesn't impact your bottom line. You also have, in the maintain, you have your inflationary increases in your contribution to capital so that you can keep pace with the cost of delivering capital works. There's also debt charges, an increase there that's related to, in 2017, we accelerated some of the debt issuances to take advantage of the lower rates, so there's an increase in the debt charges. Most of that is offset, though, from a one-time bridge from your citywide reserve. And then you have a small contribution to capital increase that's a one-timer for Parks and Rec renewal. And then the tax increases for, and this is the tax increases for everybody, it's not just the city, it's also including the police. In the growth area, we have an increase in federal gas tax revenue. They've indexed it, and so we're seeing increases there every year. There's also the additional taxation revenue due to assessment growth, new properties being added to the roll. And then finally, you have the development charge exemption. We have, with the adoption of the new development charges bylaw, we've been increasing the allocation that we have for this particular account every year to bring it up to what is the average of the value of exemptions that council provides every year. You also have some council priorities. The increase to the contribution to capital of approximately, I think it's $10 million in accordance with what the Long-Range Financial Plan 5 said, in order to try to bridge that gap that you have in your infrastructure funding. And then there's a number of strategic initiative funding as part of the term of council priorities that you adopted. You have a fairly small capital program except for LRT. So in buildings, you have renewal of assets. You've $2 million for basically your administrative buildings growth. The $60 million for LRT, and I will tell you right now, because you're probably aware of it, is that we have not included in this budget the actual Stage 2 LRT project. That will be coming to you, the value of the construction, that will be coming to you later in 2018 once they have got the results of the proposals back in and they've done all their evaluations and they're at the point of awarding a contractor. This is the exact same process we used for Stage 1. So when they're ready to award a contract, we will come back to you and we will establish that budget at this time. This $60 million is really to advance a lot of the land acquisition and all of the procurement that has to be done in advance of that project starting. You also have a couple of strategic initiatives. Again, we're continuing to improve accessibility to city facilities, $340,000 for general government facilities, and then we have $500,000 we've allocated this for 2018 for accommodation fit-ups and renovations. We have a target to try to reduce the city's overall footprint for leasing, and in order to do that, we need a small envelope of money to be able to do minor fit-ups, to be able to relocate staff into other city facilities and reduce our leasing costs. So where is that all funded from? because most of it is light rail, it is revenue, that is provincial and federal revenue from it. And then the city portion is, there's a small portion of DCs on that, and then in addition, tax debt. The rest of it, the stuff that's not light rail, is all coming from reserves, it's cash. And that's the conclusion of my presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll hold questions to staff until we hear from the delegations, and we have a list of individuals who would like to speak. Remind members of the public, if you could come up to this desk right to the right of Councillor Monette, and you have 5 minutes. So the first person to register is Emily Poitvin from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, followed by the Orleans Chamber of Commerce representatives. This is from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. So good morning and welcome. Can you just push the button for the microphone, please?
Of course. Thank you so much for having me here today to talk about small business issues. So we know that small businesses are important to our city and our main streets. They're really the lifeblood of our communities like Hintonburg and the Glebe. Our role at C5B is really to represent these small businesses. We represent over 109,000 businesses across Canada with over 2,000 members, in the Ottawa region here. So the top 3 issues that small business owners in Ottawa have identified as important to us really inform the recommendations that I want to share with you all today. So property tax levels, concerns about the ease of doing business, and worries about local roads and highway were actually all higher than the Ontario average in Ottawa. So Ottawa businesses were also more concerned about customer support by the city than the rest of Ontario. As property tax levels are their top concern, small business owners worry that spending increases that are not sustainable will lead to higher taxes in future to pay off or service debts. Small businesses also want to be a bigger part of the planning process and decision-making at the municipal level. This includes around construction projects. Often, a lot of the outreach that the city does is very focused on residents. So this means that a lot of small business owners can feel left out of the process or feel as though that the city isn't really taking into account their unique situations and needs. So we know that the city is looking for ways and opportunities that it can provide our SMEs to keep them competitive in an increasingly difficult business environment. They're facing higher wages with minimum wage going up in January and tax increases at the federal level. So it's important that the city find ways to really communicate that they're engaged and that they care about small business owners. We're already seen as one of the best cities to live in, so let's look for ways to become one of the best cities to open a small business in. So based on feedback we've received from small business owners, they want the city to start implementing a plan to help ease their tax burden. We recommend that in order to ensure that spending is sustainable, that the city limit any increases to population growth plus inflation. It is also important to ensure that the property tax gap between commercial and resident is no more than 2 to 1. Currently, Ottawa has one of the highest in Ontario, where in 2016, Ottawa commercial paid 2.72 times as much in property taxes as homeowners. This will go a long way to show that the city really understands the multitude of pressures that small business owners are currently facing from all 3 levels of government. So the Elgin Street Renewal Project will undoubtedly impact a lot of the members in that area. So whether it's customers having trouble accessing a business or being impacted by construction noise or debris, the city has an opportunity here to show business owners that it understands their concerns and to take a lead on construction mitigation. So it is important that the city ensures that business owners are really informed, that lines of communication remain open throughout the project, and that business owners understand what the purpose and end goal of the project is. So construction can have a severe impact on businesses, as 45% of our members have said that they have felt some impacts of construction over the past 5 years, and 60% of these saw their sales decrease. So we think it is unfair for any individual to disproportionately sacrifice their own livelihood for these projects. So for any significant disruption, we recommend that the city should consider providing some sort of compensation, as Montreal has recently agreed to do. So however, disruption should always be minimal enough that the businesses don't actually need compensation. We will be doing some surveying of businesses along Elgin Street to provide them with an opportunity for feedback and to give us their concerns, and we would be pleased to provide this information to you and your colleagues. And CFIB is always ready to work with the city to find solutions to ensure that business owners aren't negatively impacted by construction. Lastly, we think that Ottawa can really be a leader in Canada among municipalities by becoming one of the best places to open and run a business. There are several things that the city can do that we think fit this bill. So we recommend implementing a permanent business license for sectors where one is required. So only the certain sectors in the city do require one, but rather than adding to all the red tape that they already have to deal with an annual license, we're asking the city to consider making it permanent. We also recommend that the city implement online permits where businesses can apply, pay for, and monitor the progress of their application.
1 minute.
We're big fans of the city's ambassador service for food businesses, and we actually recently met with Joanne Cléroux. We really believe that businesses in the city could benefit from expertise like hers, and we would love to see this initiative made permanent. We would also love to see it expanded to other sectors as well. So improving communication and customer service for small businesses can actually go a long way to reducing their red tape burden. So we recommend that the city also take steps to make it easier for businesses to find information on the website, and this includes construction projects. So we also recommend that the city ensure that 311 is also better able to respond to business inquiries and businesses are able to get timely and accurate information from the city. So thank you very much for hearing our recommendations, and I welcome any questions.
Great, thank you very much. Councillor Harder had a question to delegate.
Yeah, I leaned over to Councillor Aglai and I said, did she just say Hintonburg? Did you highlight Hintonburg in the first sentence or two?
Yes.
And why?
So it's just one of our main streets where the small businesses along it really add to the character. They're really what make Hintonburg a neighborhood where people want to go, where people want to live. So people don't necessarily search out neighborhoods where there are big box stores. When you're thinking of the lively neighborhoods in our city, you're really thinking of the neighborhoods where there's really interesting small businesses, and these business owners usually are very involved in the communities. They really what make it kind of special. So.
And then I have a question about your survey that you intend to do on Elgin Street.
Yep.
With that big project that we're doing, and certainly it's a large investment.
Yes.
On an important street. So have you ever done surveys elsewhere, for example, in suburban community where there's a mix of businesses? You have some large businesses, but you also have some small businesses where they have, like for example, Strandherd Drive in Barrhaven. So Strandherd Drive is like incredibly polluted with traffic. So have you ever done the mix of that? So you're talking about compensation there. I'm just wondering if you think outside the box and go to suburban areas as well, and you look at the impacts of pressure of volume.
So this would be the first time we did this survey in Ottawa. We've done a similar survey in Vancouver, but we could definitely consider doing further surveys once we get this one out of the way. This is kind of a pilot for us, so it's a new initiative.
Thank you.
No problem.
Great. Any other questions? Oh, Councillor Taylor, please.
Thanks very much. Just a quick question with respect to your proposed compensation budget for businesses that have been affected by capital works. The second or third priority you had was exactly that. It was streets and, so I'm wondering how your first was keep taxes low. So I'm wondering how you square those three.
So for compensation, it doesn't necessarily need to be direct monetary compensation. It can also be ways to delay paying of property taxes. So say you give them a little bit of extra time and a little bit of leniency on this if they're really having severe disruptions in their business that are really affecting their cash flow. So for local roads and highways, members do really, really support keeping our infrastructure. But at the same time, they really want to ensure that their businesses are able to remain open and that they're still able to serve their customers. So it's really asking for a balance. And it's really asking that their particular needs be kept in mind when these projects are ongoing.
Okay, so just to go back though to your original statement. So your suggestion would be to trend more towards non-direct monetary compensation and look for other ways of compensating business.
It can be either or. So ideally, these businesses wouldn't need this kind of construction mitigation measure, so the compensation, because the city would be able to keep them in the loop and keep that planning process really centered around them. But these are really for situations where there's big disruptions, where they're really losing 50% of their customer base. So it'd be in very exceptional circumstances that mitigation would be required for businesses, we think. And I'd be happy to discuss this further with you.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Great, thank you very much.
No problem.
Our next delegation is from the Orleans Chamber of Commerce. Sean Crossan, Chair, Kevin Conroy, Past Chair, and Andrew Scott, Board Member, followed by Joan Kuyek, Gotta Go Campaign. We might need another chair for, oh, you have many people. How many are speaking, Sean? Is it just you?
So there's going to be just me speaking, and then we have some members of our business community to show us support for this initiative.
Okay, so you have 5 minutes. Welcome. There's some seats there, folks.
Good morning, Your Worship and FEDCO committee members. My name is Sean Crossan. I'm the chair of the Orleans Chamber of Commerce. With me today is Kevin Conroy, past chair, Andrew Scott, vice chair, and innovative Orleans business presidents and CEOs who have joined us today, such as John Liptak from Oakwood, such as Mehdi Madavi, Mehdi's over here, from Zodiac Lightwave, such as Omar Abuzahar, vice president BMO, and we have another colleague that was supposed to join us. I don't see him here today, Ian Glenn from ING Robotics. We are united here today to seek your support for $40,000 funding and resources to assist Orleans in defining our innovative future as part of an overall integrated economic development strategy for the National Capital Region. Why? Because LRT is a game changer for our community and a catalyst for Orleans' economic development and job opportunities. Take Blair Road at the 174, for example. 1,400 new jobs are being created at this LRT stop alone. We, as a Chamber of Commerce, are experiencing these positive spin-off effects as we have 70 new members this year alone, bringing us nearly to 240 members, highest ever. We are the only chamber that has a database comprised of businesses and planning information. That is a big deal. Of nearly 2,800 businesses, so that we can provide info to new businesses who wish to locate or existing businesses who wish to expand in our community. In 2016, we launched the first ever professional 9-channel marketing campaign, Orleans for Your Business, innovative Orleans for Your Business, that reached over 150,000 people to promote the businesses in our community, to highlight our great quality of life, and to attract new businesses. At the second annual Orleans Chamber of Commerce Economic Development Symposium held on November 21st, approximately 200 people participated in Innovative Orleans for Your Business Symposium. What we heard is that Orleans' landscape is changing, and innovative businesses like Oakwood, Zodiac, ING, Exahide, Rebel Technologies, to name a few, are developing innovative products, processes, and technologies that are creating economic growth, jobs, and employing our highly skilled workforce. Why Orleans? Family, quality of life, bilingualism, more reasonable land development costs, and the highest number of PhD per capita in the city of Ottawa. We have got talent, in part due to the proximity to the National Research Council, CSIS, CSC, the University of Ottawa, and La Cité Collégiale. Our Economic Development Symposium panel of experts strongly recommended that we do the following. 1, define what the Orleans knowledge-based economy and startup centers of expertise are going to be, and develop an implementation plan in consultation with Orleans businesses, all levels of government, including the City of Ottawa, and stakeholders from throughout Orleans as part of an integrated national capital regional partnerships for innovation plan, which the city currently has. And of course, the first priority is the knowledge-based economy. Collaborate with post-secondary institutions like La Cité and Ottawa U and government research centers to develop a vision, a plan for incubation and startup spaces as part of the Orleans Economic Development Plan. Mobilize our highly educated talent to foster an incubation and startup center of expertise in Orleans that is connected to a larger national capital regional network.
1 minute.
Just like they have in Toronto with 14 incubation and startups locations. Educate commercial real estate property brokers about commercial industrial land opportunities, and position the Orleans Chamber to act as a hub for business information to facilitate ease of access to this information. Our ask, the Orleans Chamber of Commerce kindly requests your commitment and your support to secure a City of Ottawa Economic Development Grant for $40,000 and a resource person on a part-time basis to work with us to define what the Orleans knowledge-based economy and center of expertise is going to be, and to develop a practical implementation plan. Thank you. We'd be pleased to take questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Sean. Councillor Harder, please.
Thank you for coming out in full force today. I did say that I'm surprised you don't have any women on your, on the Orleans Chamber? Just asking.
So we have 2 women board members that weren't able to make it here today.
Okay. So my question is, why, with all that you were talking about, would you come and ask the city for $40,000? And I ask that because you are going to benefit so greatly by the first stage of the LRT. Like, certainly not in Councillor Hubley's, Councillor mine, most of the councillors, Councillor Dean's. Why, with all of that investment that the city has made in bringing LRT in the first stage right into Orleans, would you actually believe that you could come here and ask us for $40,000 to support that? And I would add, too, in the last few years, we have invested in one of our economic development programs on St. Joseph Boulevard, which I know, speaking from Councillor Manette, Deputy Mayor Manette, that has proven fruitful as well. So, I mean, you have the right to come. I just don't understand why you would think that you would need taxpayers' money to further support what obviously is the stage for something fantastic to happen. And I ask that sincerely, it may sound jealous to you, but it isn't. It actually is a question.
So to answer that question fully, firstly, this is not the first time that we've sought funds. We approached the province of Ontario and the Ministry of Economic Development 2 years ago for funding. They told us we were part of Fat Cat City and that we weren't going to get any funding from the province. So we've already tried that. Okay, we tried other sources of funds. Secondly, Orleans' employment rate is extremely low, and we need to improve that. Orleans has been forgotten in the economic development picture, and we have not been consulted properly. And that's one of the reasons why we're here in force today, Madame Harder, is that it's time to create an innovation and an economic development strategy and a plan for Orleans. And it's time for us to be consulted as part of that plan, because that hasn't happened to a great extent.
Well, I'm going to argue with you on that.
You can do that.
Somebody who has been pushing for economic development in this city for as long as I have been here, okay? You have been given a lot of advantages. We have actually gone to Orleans and tested projects over the many years, and we continue to support all areas of the city. I know that Mr. Smith, I think he's here, has a team, part of his team, that works just as hard on Orleans as they do with Invest Ottawa on the West End, Ottawa, the West Ottawa Board of Trade. There's certainly all the BIAs, and Councillor El Shantiri can speak to that, and most of us have BIAs, okay? So, what we don't have is the advantage of all the things you just pointed out. So I know that I'm just surprised that you be coming with all of that advantage to ask for $40,000. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Well, there is an economic development grant process, and that's why we're seeking to have access to that, which is, I think, our right.
Oh, it's your right. It just would be wrong.
Thank you.
In your perspective.
Councillor Deans.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Well, I think it's a little bit unusual. I can't recall having a Chamber of Commerce come and do a specific ask for $40,000 to this committee. But we do have an economic development branch headed by Mr. Smith. And I guess my question for you is, have you been working with the city's economic development branch to further your goals?
Yes, we have, Madame Deans, Councillor Deans, and we actually received a fairly positive response back because it would fit into your overall innovation partnerships plan. And of course, the first pillar of that is the knowledge-based economy. And so, yes, this is in line with your innovation partnership plan. And we will continue, we hope to collaborate and continue to work with city officials and city staff to have an integrated economic development plan for the whole city of Ottawa.
And either Ms. Simlak or maybe Mr. Kanalakis, if you can just remind me, the economic development budget, do organizations like this need to come to FEDCO for that, or is that those disbursements within that budget made by city staff?
They are made by city staff.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Blais, please.
I'm actually fine, Mr. Mayor. I'm fine, thank you.
Anyone else? I just wanted, you mentioned real estate tours and so on. I just wanted to give a kudo to Councillor Monette, because you've been, I think, for a couple of years, you get a bus. I went on one of those tours, and a very innovative, I think it's the only time I've seen someone do this in their ward, where you get a bus and you travel around with realtors and property brokers and so on, letting them know land available for development, for job creation, and so on. So that's something that I'd encourage other members of council to look at, because I think it works very well, because you get a lot of people from downtown and other parts of the city going out and experiencing Orleans as a place to invest. So thank you very much, delegation. Appreciate it. Next is Joan
Thank you, Your Worship.
Kuyek from Gotta Go campaign, followed by Ian Ferris and Su-Ling Ching from the Chambers of Commerce in the West End and Ottawa. So good morning and welcome. Just grab a seat there, and if you can push the button, you've got 5 minutes.
And the slides should come up? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors. It's a pleasure to speak to you this morning. We'll be brief. I'm representing the Gotta Go campaign, which speaks for an awful lot of people in this city these days, seniors, people with small children, people with Crohn's and colitis, and others. We don't have a formal membership, but we have at one point got a petition that was signed by 1,000 people, and we know we could get more if we needed it. We've been in touch with most of you over the last few years. As you know, these toilets are an issue for everyone, and as the city ages, it's becoming more of an issue, and the thing we're finding is as people stop being ashamed to talk about the problems they've had, it's coming up more and more, and it's incumbent upon council to respond to it. We're asking you for a few things today. One is directional signage, and we've been to the planning committee already asking for this. But we were told at other times that it was a responsibility of FEDCO, so we're bringing that to your attention too. The inclusion of a system of signage directing people to the nearest public toilet, in addition to the app, is really important and is something that wouldn't cost a lot but would make a huge difference for tourists and for people who are trying to find one. We did install our own sign in Confederation Park about a month ago. We got a lot of attention for doing that. And the NCC, it turned out it was, of course, NCC property. They told us they couldn't put the sign up because it pointed at a city building. Surely we could negotiate something with them. We have some concerns about LRT toilet signage. We want to thank you for putting toilets in the hub stations of the LRT Phase 1 and 2. That will make a huge difference. But is it going to be easy for people to find these toilets? And will there be will it be included in advertising for the LRT that these toilets are available? For people who have urgency issues, planning your trip becomes a really important matter. We also have some concerns about maintenance of toilets in the LRT, and we do know that there's money set aside for that, but please make sure that it's adequate to maintain them in a clean and safe condition. We want to be able to take responsibility for a functioning network of public toilets in Ottawa, and one of the things we found over and over again is we're passed from one committee or department to another. The toilets fall between responsibility for all sorts of groups. It's one of the reasons we keep turning up talking to you about toilets in all sorts of different places. It is the responsibility of this committee to coordinate between departments and with the NCC, with private providers, and with Ottawa Tourism. And we're suggesting that the municipal accommodation tax provides an opportunity to fund some staff time to make sure that that coordination takes place. I realize that this is new on your agenda, but since this is being considered by you folks, we think that it would be important to be dealt with. Thank you very much for your time, and we appreciate being able to address FEDCO today.
Great, thank you. Sgenda Question, are there any questions for the delegation? Thank you very much. Next is Ian Ferris, CEO of the Ottawa Chamber of Commerce, and Su-Ling Ching, CEO, West Ottawa Board of Trade. And that'll be followed by Murray Gallant, Member Accessibility Advisory Committee. So Ian and Su-Ling, nice to see you here together. Welcome.
Thank you. So good morning, Your Worship, councillors and city staff. My name's Ian Ferris. I'm the President and CEO of the Ottawa Chamber of Commerce, and I'm joined today by Ms. Su-Ling Ching, the CEO of the West Ottawa Board of Trade. And we're here appearing on behalf of the 3 local chambers of commerce, the Orleans Chamber of Commerce, the Ottawa Chamber of Commerce, and the West Ottawa Board of Trade. And we're joined by a number of our chamber members and board members in the audience today, so I want to thank them for coming out. Also, it's our pleasure to address you today in response to the draft City of Ottawa 2018 budget. So today our organizations collectively represent over 1,350 members with over 45,000 employees. We're working closely to strengthen the voice of business in Ottawa and ensure the interests of the business community are represented on relevant matters at all levels of government. We collaborate with economic development stakeholders across the city with the goal of making Ottawa the best place to live, work, and play, as well as to visit, study, and invest. We applaud your commitment to less than 2% increase citywide for taxes, particularly when facing many of the same challenges of our local businesses addressing the impacts of Ontario Bill 148. The combination of fiscal responsibility and spending, combined with innovative investment in economic development, will garner us the greatest long-term results. Additionally, thank you for exploring such opportunities as better transit integration, sustainable green energy initiatives, and projects like community improvement plans and major city building initiatives. We wish to restate our position to the city, for the city to conduct and share economic impact reports for major spending projects. We believe this exercise will serve to set spending priorities, garner public support, and encourage businesses and the community to identify opportunities to plan and be involved.
The key tenets of our presentation today are intended to establish a basis that we can build upon in the future. The 3 key points are around accountability, brand, and collaboration. We are asking for more clarity. We wish to see a budget that clearly delineates how much is invested in economic development activities and infrastructure, where it is spent, and the expected deliverables and outcomes. We would like to work toward a whole of community framework for economic development, innovation, and job growth. This framework would serve as a means of achieving our shared economic development goals, measuring impact, holding each other accountable, and identifying gaps and solutions. In addition, we would like to see consistent community reporting on economic development using key performance measures against our goals, as well as other comparable cities to whom we aspire in some way. This report would have the dual purpose of serving as an engagement and marketing tool. We encourage you to be bold. We wish to see a budget that reflects an aspirational, long-term vision and strong brand, one that will distinguish us on the global stage similar to Ottawa 2017, and rally the community behind the city where we are going so that we can get there even faster. This vision should be easy to share, leverage current global trends and local strengths, and inspire. Future budgets could be aligned with and measured against this vision, values, and plan. This vision will serve to focus our resources and efforts, increase our impact through engagement, and position Ottawa in the global marketplace. We ask you to continue to collaborate. The City of Ottawa, local economic development stakeholders, and business leaders of Ottawa acknowledge the value of collaboration and have begun to work together even more. We encourage continued and greater collaboration with our local partners at the NCC, Gatineau, and Eastern Ontario. In addition, higher engagement of community stakeholders, including the business community, would result in a paradigm shift in our resources. Our approach to business as high-value clients, ambassadors, and promoters, and idea generators would mobilize our economic development priorities.
There's much opportunity for our businesses today. However, they are also facing many challenges, including, but not limited to, the impact of digitization and disruption in the global economy, rapidly changing legislation such as tax and labor reform, increased regulatory burden, and talent shortages. The city has demonstrated great support of our business community. However, more is needed, and you cannot do it alone. On behalf of our members, the Chambers would like to participate in the process of setting Ottawa's economic agenda in a meaningful way. Please continue to call on us. In summary, the Chambers of Commerce of Ottawa offer our support for the city and its economic development priorities. We believe Ottawa has the potential to be the greatest city in the world if we aspire to do so. A clearly communicated and aspirational vision, combined with a community economic development and innovation plan that leverages our strengths and partnerships, would give us a competitive edge over other markets. The global economic landscape is changing quickly, and the coming years promise to transform our businesses and our lives more profoundly than any prior period. There is much that is unknown, and whole industries have the potential to emerge or disappear. Ottawa will either flourish with this opportunity or risk being left out. The key will be how we work together, communicate, and achieve our common goals. We wish to express our appreciation to you, the Mayor and City Council, along with City staff, for your commitment to economic development and innovation. Thank you for your ongoing support of our business community and the members of the Orleans Chamber of Commerce, Ottawa Chamber of Commerce, and West Ottawa Board of Trade. Your team often engage our associations in new initiatives, consult us on priority issues, and attend and sponsor our events. We value our partnership with the city and our mission to create a prosperous Ottawa community. We are stronger together. Thank you for allowing us to present this morning.
Great. Councillor Hubley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you both for coming in, and I really appreciate the very positive message that you brought, and I noticed how you talked about how working together as a city, we can get more done. Today, I think we're going to hear from delegations from a number of different groups that will speak specifically just to their group. I really appreciate that you realize that your businesses and your association has an impact on the whole city, and so thank you for that. Also want to share with my colleagues how much we work together with you on things and a wide range, and so thank you for the work that you do in our community too.
Thank you, Councillor. Conseiller Monette, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, thank you for coming in, and it's great to see you here, Ian. I'm being from Orleans. It's great to have representation at that level. I like the concept that you're looking at. I think we need a strong voice, a united, strong voice. Will the chambers in the West and the Orleans still have their independent status as it moves forward? Will they still have a voice as Orleans Chamber of Commerce and be able to, promote, the community as they have done in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, the three chambers are working together on a number of initiatives. Sue Ling has been in her position for, about 18 years. She certainly brought a renewed energy to the collaborative relationship. We want to keep, all areas of the city in mind. And I think today we focused, and as Councillor Hubley mentioned, we focused on to take a whole of community approach, and but we do recognize that there are individual areas within the community that need some attention, but we're here to represent all business across the city.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just to thank you for being here and for the collaborative approach I've seen in the last year or so of working together, and we very much appreciate the activities and events and advocacy that you bring here to the city, and thank you for the presentation. Great. Our next speaker is Murray Gallant, Member Accessibility Advisory Committee, followed by our final speaker on the budget, Joanne Leroux, le président du Comité des services en français. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity to provide input with respect to the proposed Finance and Economic Committee budget on behalf of the Accessibility Advisory Committee. Pursuant to the Accessibility with Ontarians with Disabilities Act, the primary role of the AAC is to provide feedback and advice to Council on programs, policies, and services that impact persons with disabilities and seniors. We want to reiterate our appreciation for the long-standing and ongoing commitment to accessibility that the City has shown by this Council, City staff, and particularly in the Accessibility Office and Councillor Cadre. Last year, we were concerned that the new organizational structure in the City and any changes to the Accessibility Office could result in lessening this commitment to accessibility. We are pleased to say that these fears have not come to fruition. In fact, we are pleased that the accessibility has been incorporated into everyday operation of the City. For example, the City is streamlining and standardizing its approach in seeking the Committee's feedback on projects to ensure that accessibility is taken into consideration at the outset. We have also noticed that the City has responded to our recommendation to include persons with disabilities in communications material as evidenced in these draft budget documents. We want to continue to work with the City as a consultation resource to ensure that consideration of accessibility in all City projects, policies, practices, and procedures. As you know, in Ontario, 15.4% of the population reported having a disability, which is over 1.6 million people. In Ottawa, 1 in 5 residents report having some form of disability. We also know that the occurrence of disabilities rises with age, and that as a society, we are getting older. We all will eventually benefit from a fully accessible and barrier-free city. We have reviewed the 2017 draft Finance and Economic Development Committee budget and would like to offer the following observations. We are of the view that this proposed budget offers numerous opportunities to improve accessibility. For clarity, we have grouped them into 4 themes. LRT, the transformation of Ottawa's rapid transit network, resulting in the opening of 13 new transit stations and the introduction of light rail transit vehicles, all of which have been designed to be accessible to all customers. Lighting, $4.2 million devoted to improve lighting over several projects, which improves accessibility for all citizens of Ottawa. Connectivity, $5.1 million for improving connectivity, pedestrian facilities, new sidewalks, curb ramps, etc., which the Accessibility Advisory Committee will be reviewing for accessibility inclusion in these future projects. Safety, $5.1 million specifically for new traffic control devices, including audible signaling for persons with diverse visual abilities, area traffic management, and traffic and safety management enhancement. Mr. Mayor, I would now like to take the opportunity to highlight several areas where our committee feels it can continue to provide constructive assistance. We support the City's continued investment in making Ottawa accessible for all citizens as the next phase of light rail transit comes operational in the spring of 2018. We understand that the City is keeping accessibility as a priority and appreciate the cultural shift with City leaders and staff where accessibility is no longer an add-on feature, but fully integrated in all policy and program decisions. However, we are concerned that the private sector is not, and thus suggests that a focus be placed on initiatives to encourage the private sector to follow the City's lead, with cities around the world trying to market themselves as places of business, tourist destinations, etc. How about Ottawa being the most accessible, inclusive city? Mr. Mayor, on behalf of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, we would like to express our appreciation for the long-standing and ongoing commitment to accessibility that has been shown by Council, City staff, and particularly the Accessibility Office. We would also like to offer our continued service as a consultation resource supporting accessibility and inclusion in all City projects, policies, practices, and procedures. Thank you. Take any questions.
Great. Are there any questions of the delegation? just to say thank you for the great work that you do, and I appreciate you singling out Councillor Caudry as the council representative. I know he takes the committee work very seriously, so thank you for your thoughtful, detailed presentation.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Maintenant, c'est le temps pour Joanne Leroux, qui est le président de la comité sur la langue française. Et nous avons la traduction qui est disponible aujourd'hui. Bonjour, madame. Bienvenue.
Bonjour, monsieur le maire, mesdames les conseillères, messieurs les conseillers. Les membres du comité consultatif sur les services en français sont ravis de voir que la Ville d'Ottawa démontre son engagement envers la prestation de services en français et sa politique de bilinguisme en envisageant d'entériner un budget qui continuera d'assurer une offre active de services en français de qualité. Les membres du CCSF se réjouissent de constater que, dans le budget préliminaire de 2018, un ajustement au budget de la Direction des services en français ait été accordé afin qu'elle maintienne ses services. Nous sommes d'avis que cet ajustement lui permettra de continuer à appuyer les directions générales dans la prestation de leurs services en français aux résidents et aux employés, ce qui correspond à l'objectif 5 de notre plan d'action. Le CCSF ose espérer que le budget prévu en 2018 permettra aux responsables des ressources humaines de commencer à poser des jalons et à concevoir des stratégies afin de mettre en œuvre certaines recommandations du CCSF quant aux méthodes de recrutement du personnel visant à attirer à tous les échelons un plus grand nombre de candidates et de candidats bilingues et représentatifs de la diversité de la communauté, comme le prévoit l'objectif 4 de notre plan d'action. Enfin, le comité consultatif sur les services en français est heureux d'appuyer le travail du bureau du greffier municipal et de l'avocat général dans la prestation continue de services en français dans le cadre des élections municipales de 2018. Je vous remercie de votre écoute.
Merci beaucoup et je veux dire un grand merci aussi à conseiller Eli El-Shantiri qui est le représentant du conseil municipal sur votre comité. Merci pour votre bon travail. Merci aussi à tous les bénévoles qui travaillent avec vous. Conseiller El-Shantiri, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le maire. Madame la Présidente, j'aimerais souligner le développement et l'excellent travail du comité consultatif sur le service en français cette année. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Merci à vous, Monsieur El-Shantiri.
Est-ce qu'il y a des autres questions? Non? Merci. So we have the roadmap and motions that we'll present, and then we'll go to questions of staff. So Councillor El-Shantiri has the roadmap, which will bring us page by page. I don't know if we have to read the whole thing. It basically, you want to just give the preliminary, and then it lists each page on the
on the advice of legal, Mr. Mayor, we'll go item by item whenever you want to carry the items.
Yeah. So does everyone have a copy of the roadmap? Is it sent around everyone? It's in the shared folder. So it's moved to El-Shantiri that FEDCO recommend the council sitting as committee of the whole approve the Finance and Economic Development Committee draft operating capital budget, and then we'll go line by line.
So will we do general questions?
Yeah, after we introduce the motions. Okay, so that's Councillor El-Shantiri. Next is Councillor Harder, has a motion. And are there any other motions at this point? No. So, Councillor Harder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a motion, I don't know if it's up on any screen, but whereas the Environmental Stewardship Advisory Committee approved a motion supporting that any surplus from the Hydro Ottawa dividend be directed to renewable energy programs and initiatives, and members of council agree that increased funding for energy efficiency initiatives such as building retrofits is a priority. And we have heard from the public that more funds are needed for roads resurfacing in 2018. And whereas the city treasurer says that addressing any potential surplus is not a budget issue, but it would be addressed once the amount of a surplus, if there is a surplus. This is all about if there is, because we do not know that when the dividend payments is received in the spring. If there is a surplus over and above what our guarantor or guarantee is, then we would allocate 2/3 of that amount towards the road resurfacing program and the other third towards energy efficiency programs within the city. That's the gist of my motion.
So, Councillor Deans, you had questions to staff, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first question is on LRT. The Confederation line is set to open in 2018, and at the Transit Commission yesterday, Mr. Manconi indicated that should there be a delay in the delivery date, any financial implications and plans would report out through FEDCO. Given that this deadline is critical to assumptions made in the 2018 draft budget and that FEDCO has carriage over this project, could staff please outline for us the critical dates in the contract with RTG and the penalty provisions put in place in the contract with RTG to mitigate any financial risk to the city? And also, I'd like to know, are the penalties sufficient to cover any potential lost fare revenues or additional costs to keep more buses and transit operators on the road longer than anticipated?
Mr. Chair, I'll begin from the legal perspective with regards to the project agreement. I think there's probably a couple of dates that members are familiar with. With regards to the first one, it's something called substantial completion with regards to these projects. It's fairly complex matter in the contract, so I'm going to simplify it. It's the date when I believe that only minor efficiencies remain with regards to the construction of either the works and or the vehicles. So in other words, there's nothing that actually prevents them from being put to their regular use. So that's and there is no specific date, but it would become before the next date, which I know that members are familiar with, which is the revenue service availability date. This was prepared and given to members of council in May with one of the earlier quarterly reports from the Rio office. I'm just going to read the top of page 3, Mr. Mayor. Revenue service availability is a contractual identified in the project agreement between the city and RTG, identifying the date that the city officially takes ownership of the newly constructed train Confederation line system. The project agreement has been established that the ownership date will be on May 24th, 2018. And with regards to those, I can leave the general manager or the director to talk about the financial pieces behind them, but I will mention, Mr. Mayor, one other one, which is the liquidated damages clause, which leads into a broader discussion. Liquidated damages, as members will recall, is actually an agreement between two parties, usually a provision in agreement with regards to what would be the estimated loss by one party as a result of any particular default as defined by the agreement. So with that, Mr. Mayor, members will recall probably we've had previous discussions of liquidated damages. They are not, repeat, not penalties, so they're not meant to penalize one party or the other. That's actually deemed to be illegal and unenforceable. So therefore, it actually has to be a reasonable pre-estimate of the losses that one party or the other feels that might happen as a result of the default. With regards to the project agreement, I'll read from the section on the website, Mr. Mayor, which says, if Project Co. provides notice to the city on or before the required notification date, but revenue service availability does not occur by the required date, the city shall be entitled to damages of $1 million. And that amount shall constitute the city's sole recourse against Project Co. because of some of the other financial implications that arise. That was deemed to be, between the parties, the reasonable estimate. So, Mr. Mayor, those are the three dates, and I'll leave it to Mr. Mayor, the director, to follow up.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. Yeah, Mr. Mayor, the summary of what Mr. O'Connor was saying in sort of the legal terms is the taxpayer is protected on multiple fronts. There are three dates or time periods that you can reference. There's what's called substantial completion, which is basically when is the system constructed or almost completed. There's the revenue service availability date, and I'll explain that in a moment. And then there's when we as City Council decide that we put the service into the train into service for our customers. The first two are contractual obligations, and what happens from those is we go through very rigorous testing and commissioning process our partners, RTG, because we have a number of outcomes that we're protecting. Number one, we want to deliver, and we will deliver, the system that you have paid for, that has been presented to you by the consortium. Number two, it needs to be safe, meet all compliance requirements, service deliverables, standards, and so forth, and there is a very rigorous process for that in the contract, and we're doing that in partnership with RTG. And there's an independent certification process both for safety and completion. With respect to the protection to the taxpayer and to City Council, there are penalties, but more importantly, in the context of the discussion yesterday, Councillor Deans, the revenue service, when we decide to put the train in service, when it's gone through the rigorous testing and commissioning and mock scenarios and all those things that are important to make sure we get what we've asked for, if we don't meet those dates, we don't flow the money to RTG. So there are penalties, but there are also heavy financial disincentives for RTG for not making substantial completion and for going into revenue service, and then for when we launch. So we're covered on multiple fronts, and we have all the levers to ensure that we get what we've asked for, to the standard that we asked for, and there's layers of protections built in both in the project agreement and as your role of oversight in terms of the financial aspects of the contract.
I'm not 100% clear. I understand the substantial completion date and the revenue service, and those are contractual obligations. And did I hear Mr. O'Connor right saying that's $1 million penalty? I thought it was higher than that.
There is one penalty that's worth $1 million. There are other penalties if they miss certain dates that are in the multi-millions, and it compounds month after month. And you're protected because if we don't do what we were planning to do, which was less buses and less operators and so forth, the savings, we don't make the payments to RTM and RTG.
Okay, because that's what it's really about, right? But then once they get to substantial completion, presuming they do on May 24th, then are there still penalties if we delay the implementation?
You have to shift that around. They have to meet a bunch of test protocols that are in the project agreement, condition running, a number of hours that systems have to operate 100%, and so forth. So it's all on them. That's that risk transfer that you've paid for in the P3. So you're protected on. There are the penalties that Mr. O'Connor spoke about. And there's also, they don't get your cash for payments for the 30-year concession period. So without that,
the $200 million?
You have a 30-year, $3 billion concession that you've given them to maintain it, both the tracks, the systems, and the trains. If they don't get that cash flow, they can't do their repayment process that they've put in terms of the investments back to the city. So you're protected on multiple fronts.
Okay, thank you for that. And do we have a substantial completion date? I'd heard May 7th, is that right?
There is a substantial completion date in the contract of May 7th. That's for the trains and the systems and the majority of the system. There is an RSA contractual date of May 24th, and you've heard RTG in the past publicly say that is their goal, to meet that. We're doing our due diligence with them on looking at scheduling, looking at testing protocols, and the many testing and commissioning activities that we have to do with them. So we're doing our due diligence to make sure that we can, before we publicly announce our go service date, we have all the pieces of the puzzle that we need to as the proponents of the system.
Okay, so bottom line, from the budget perspective, if for any reason it's delayed, the numbers in the budget will still be fine because there'll be penalties that will offset if we have to have more operators.
Yes, and I just want to tweak that. That's exactly right, Councillor. It's penalties and cash flow to them. There's different terminology out there.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Appreciate it. I just wanted to talk about the hydro dividend for a minute. The number in the budget is $20.6 million currently that we're anticipating in 2018, for 2017?
The budget for the hydro dividend is set at $20 million. In 2017, the actual dividend received was 20.6.
Okay, and what do we normally do with that $20 million?
That $20 million is actually part of your general revenue, so it just goes to pay for all the services and programs that the city provides.
Okay, and presumably you've been having conversations with Hydro Ottawa. Do you have a sense that the dividend this year will be higher than the number that's currently in the budget?
The dividend for 2017, I actually have not been having conversations with Hydro. They send me a quarterly report to tell me of their financial situation, but there's enough caveats in there to basically lead you to believe there's nothing to glean from it. So at this point in time, I can't tell you if there will be more than $20 million or not received from them.
What about you, Mr. Kanellakis? Have you heard from Mr. Conrad over at Hydro about what we're anticipating?
He just advised me to exercise caution and not make any commitments for more dividend than what we're expecting, because they have a financial audit process. They respond to their bondholders and creditors, and they have a whole and they have a board. And he basically cautioned me from making any affirmative statements of assurance that we're going to get more than the dividend. I assured him that I would.
Thank you for that. Just general questions. On page 26, line item economic development and long-range planning, there's a decrease of $4.156 million in spending over 2017. Seemed like a big number. Just wondered why that was there.
That's two things. First of all, we were funding the Ottawa 2017 celebrations out of that office, so that's about $2.5 million. And then the second thing is you're establishing a municipal service corporation for the Byward Market. So those resources in that budget actually are taken out of the Economic Development Department.
Okay, and then on page 29, the line item on protocol, there was a significant increase to the protocol budget in 2017 over 2016 of more than $150,000. And to me, that made sense because of the Ottawa 2017 celebrations. However, in this budget, we're anticipating an additional $36,000, and I wonder if staff could explain why this budget is increasing and not decreasing since 2017, up pretty much.
Mr. Mayor, yes, that's as a result of salaries and updating all of our FTEs in that shop.
But didn't we put that number up because of 2017, so we still need more?
We used some temporary people in 2017. Those people, with respect, will no longer be with us, but there is one FTE position that I'm funding.
Okay, those are all my questions for now.
Thanks, Councillor Deans. Next, I have Councillor Aguilar, please. Else questions to staff? Councillor Elshintiri.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is this just questions, or are we also speaking to the motions as well, or we'll do that later?
Well, you can do it both at the same time if you'd like, your choice.
Okay, well, maybe I'll save the comments and motions till later. This is a question for John Manconi. We heard the presentation ago, Mr. Manconi, and one of the issues raised was we know we're putting in washrooms at the stations. The question was, will people be able to find washrooms? What's the signage going to be like? So can you run us through what the plan is in order to make sure that the washrooms that we're supplying are going to be readily findable by people?
Yes, I can assure the committee that we will have signage throughout the station, in advance of the station, but also more importantly, you recall when we had the discussion about investment in toilets in the LRT, we talked about leveraging our partners, so the malls where they're near a station or adjacent to a station, we're also working with them on signage, and then there's some great work that Mr. Willis is doing on the Tourism Ottawa front also that will leverage all that. So signage will be throughout the system.
Okay, maybe Mr. Willis can tell us about what that work is.
Certainly, Mr. Mayor, Tourism Ottawa is leading an initiative that's involving the city, the Ville de Gatineau, the National Capital Commission, and other agencies to develop a comprehensive wayfinding system for the downtown. They've done some excellent work to set some baseline wayfinding elements, and what we see doing in the next couple of years is every capital project that comes along will implement the new wayfinding system. So, for example, on Elgin Street, it will incorporate the wayfinding system, and Rideau Street, it will incorporate it. So it'll be built into each of those, and location of publicly accessible toilets is part of that wayfinding strategy.
Thank you. That's good to hear. The other question, I guess, is for Mr. Schmidt. We heard from a couple of chambers that they wanted to have a more transparent approach to the budget with regard to economic development. So I guess my question is, have we, John, traditionally briefed the chambers after the budget is tabled as to what's happening in your program? And if we haven't, is that something that we could look at doing going forward?
Mr. Mayor, we have ongoing collaboration with our various partners, including the Chambers of Commerce, the BIAs. We had a group that was called the G33, which is a collaboration group. And since I've been in this role, looking after the economic development portfolio, I have in fact been discussing sort of the modification to the program as we're moving forward. The report that FEDCO approved in June, July of this year was very much presented to the various stakeholder interests. So there's general awareness in terms of where our priorities are and where our focus is. Also, our stakeholders, our partners, also are involved in engaging with other stakeholder groups to make them aware of initiatives that are being pursued. So, for example, Invest Ottawa, an update of their strategic plan is very much reaching out to the broader community, making people aware in terms of what's going on and what their plans moving forward will be. In terms of the overall sort of budgeting side of things, again, as this committee knows, we are very limited. A big chunk of the money that we have goes towards operations. There's some money that's directed towards supporting some of the programs that we have ongoing, for example, the Community Economic Development Grant Program. And a big chunk of the funding also goes to support some of our partner groups, Ottawa Tourism and Invest Ottawa. In terms of details around budgeting and sort of funding requests, there is the availability for groups to access the various programs that we offer. We are limited in terms of what we can make available. And I think as part of next year, 2018 is going to be a foundation year where we're really starting to build what we need to do and start helping us to define what the term of council priorities would be moving forward from there. So, but there definitely is ongoing engagement and discussion with our partners and stakeholders.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Mr. Mayor, I'm going to hold my comments on the motions and let other people ask their questions.
Great, and thank you for your contribution to Councillor Harder's motion. I know you were working with her on that. Councillor Wilkinson, please.
Mr. Mayor, I have to go soon, so I'm going to speak about the motion now. As you know, I'm on the Hydro Board as well, and I'm also on the Hydro Audit Committee, and that's where I heard that we might have additional money being available. And I raised that with you on the basis of whether we could have some sort of way of looking at that, of not just doing the renewable energy one, which already been talked about at one of the committees, and I spoke to David Trudenti about that, but also whether we could help to fund some of the social programs that we can't fund this year, the new ones that you're doing a study to find out who should have it, but in the meantime, these programs exist. You were not keen on that because you didn't know who the group were there, and that's the last I heard from you on that. I spoke further with Hydro Ottawa about it. They said, be careful how you do it. The chair of the committee said, yes, you could probably do one that was conditional. The general manager was concerned about doing even that. I can say that the books, when we looked at them at our last audit committee meeting, showed that
Point
the
of order,
chances
Mr.
are
Mayor.
quite high.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
I'm talking to the motion.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wilkinson, the point of order by Councillor Harder.
It's the point of order is the Hydro Board and the operations operate under the Business Act of Ontario. They operate differently. We don't know that for sure, and I'm on the board, and I know what we sign on for, and the guesstimates that this councillor is making are clearly wrong. Well, point of order. So I would suggest, Councillor, that also sits on the board, that you think about what you're going to say.
I am thinking about what I'm going to say, and I'm quite annoyed at the fact that having raised with the mayor confidentially that there was a possibility of having funding, and he confirmed that with Hydro Ottawa, I know he's spoken to them, and this motion confirms that as well, that if it comes available, and I'm just saying there's a possibility that it will, there's also a possibility that it won't because they haven't audited the books yet, and that's been made very clear, that it should be put to a use that was something that we need to do in this community that's not being funded right now. And I raised that with the mayor, and the first I knew about this motion, which is different, was as I was driving in this morning. Nobody had the courtesy to even tell me after I raised it with him initially that that was coming forward. And I had no problem with that happening. I think there should have been some discussion other than hearing it when I got called on my car phone as I was arriving here this morning. That's the first I heard of it. And I think it's important that this council has a chance, if there is additional money that does become available, and we don't know for sure, that the council would have ability to say, if it's something that we're going to have that we were not aware of at the time the budget was put together, that there should be some way that we can put ideas forward. We had one on this morning about the Go Transits, put a trial of these portable toilets that don't need a lot of maintenance to see if they work. That's something that could be funded as a one-time item as well. I know the mayor is concerned about ones that might be ongoing items, and I understand that, but there's ways we can do to handle that. But to kind of make a uniform decision, all of these issues are issues that need to get funded. I don't disagree with that. But there's been no input on it from many of the councillors, maybe from a few others, but certainly not myself, and I'm the one that raised it in the first place. And that's why I think there should be on what this money should go for if it becomes available, rather than having it locked in now, which is what we tend to do in this case, that one or two people put their eyes together and they have to be the right people, and it comes forward and nobody else's views are ever taken into account. I know Councillor Deans has been struggling to find out how we can handle some of the social programs and ones that are valid organizations that have been ongoing for some time, and that should be part of the discussion. I know Councillor Taylor is interested in some things with housing, that should be part of the discussion. And so should be paving the roads, and so should the environmental things. So I'm just saying, Mr. Chair, I'd ask the committee that in doing this motion, that they leave it open for further discussions of what, if the money becomes available, it could be spent on.
Just to be clear, Councillor Wilkinson, when you came to see me, I was crystal clear that I did not support taking one-time money to put it into a funding program that we'd give a group money and then the next year there'd be no money for them. Because if there's money, we don't know how much. We only know in spring when Hydro comes and reports their dividends. So I've seen too many examples where people take one-time money, build up expectations by groups, and then we have to let them down because the money runs out.
But if the money does become available, that is the time when we should have a discussion with all of council. That's what I'm speaking to.
Yeah, well, this will go to council at the budget, so...
I know, but you're locking it in.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Councillor Elshin, I'll put you on the list. Councillor Elshin-Thierry, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm not sure if my colleague was in the room when the treasurer indicate to us, even if it's going to be similar surplus or above the 20 million, it's going to be a small amount. So in a budget of 3.6 billion, I find it ironically, we're talking about $600,000 possibly, or maybe less. So, and to divide it for all what you're recommending, I think. But nevertheless, we heard from the treasurer, there's $1 goes to the general tax, and the extra dividend, it will go to those programs. And I think that's a great way to have it allocated. But my question to the treasurer, if I can get your attention. So I need the treasurer's attention to my question.
My apologies, Councillor.
On slide 6, you talk about the increase in federal gas tax revenue. Is there an expectation of large increase, or what is the increase going to be?
The increase in the gas tax is somewhere around $2 million because they're indexing it. That, of course, has all been built into your long-range financial plan for transit.
So what did we receive last year, 57 or 55 from the gas tax?
I believe the number was somewhere around $50 million from the federal government.
Okay.
And somewhere around $36 million from the provincial government.
So together is 86.
Correct.
And now, so it's not a direction from either government to go to transit, but it's a city policy, am I correct?
That's correct. When we received these funds to begin with, that's where council, they directed they go, and they have been building their long-range financial plan for transit ever since.
With the increases coming, the one you anticipated, the increase in federal gas tax, it also goes automatically to...
When we updated the long-range financial plan for stage 2, we also updated the numbers for the gas tax at that time because the province had already announced at that point, if you remember, they're going to double their contribution over the next 4 years, and the federal government had already announced previously, and we'd already included the indexing in their in the amount to be received from them.
Okay, now, the other question I have, when we talk about the development charge exemption, I thought when we did the last policy on the development charge, we said we should not be making any exemption, and if we decide, or council decide to give exemption, the money has to be found somewhere else. Am I correct on, isn't that in the policy?
That is, but this is where you find that money. So yes, you have a number of statutory exemptions, but you also have a number of exemptions that you as council decided to provide as well. And when you provide that exemption, and the development charge reserves have to be reimbursed because we cannot recover that from other developments. So the city makes up whatever it exempts that contribution to the development charge reserve.
Well, the reason I'm asking you those questions, there's a reason for, because we've seen some of the project, it was listed in 2017, didn't get done because it was not enough in the development charge. Some of the work was supposed to be done, like we have a list, and some of the items didn't make it to the list because the shortage in the development charge.
So I don't think that happened this year, but it has happened in past. We haven't had enough development charges. Yes, we do defer projects, and by the fact that when you provide an exemption, you actually make up the difference in the reserve, that prevents that exemptions being one of the reasons why projects get deferred.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you. I think just to clarify, Ms. Similuk, the provincial dollars from gas tax have to go to transit because it's a program only for cities with transit, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
A little more.
The federal government is a little broader in context.
Okay, that's good, thank you. Councillor Blais, please.
Sorry, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And just to build on what Councillor was getting at, if we were to decide to divert that federal gas tax money or not put the additional monies into the transit funding, what impact would that have on debt, taxes, and fares?
It would have a fairly significant impact because your whole plan is built with that baked in there. So if you take that out, and this is the same answer that Mr. Manconi gave you yesterday when asked about adding something into the budget, you have a couple of options. Number one is you could actually reduce your capital program. So stage 2 could be basic risk. You could have to pass it off. If you still want to continue with the capital program, you either would have to increase your taxes in transit significantly, or you'd have to increase fares because the two are supposed to go hand in hand. So those basically are your options if you decide to move money that's dedicated towards transit to other programs within the city.
And in the unlikely, and I would suggest highly unlikely scenario where there was to be some kind of glut of new money from the feds in this regard, using it to, what would be the negative, what would be the positive impact on using this to fund our capital investments to city taxpayers?
You'll have to rephrase.
Would it help us pay down our debt quicker? How would it change the LRF if they double their amount of money tomorrow? which I agree is highly unlikely, but if they did that, what would be the positive benefit to the
The way both federal and provincial programs have rolled out in the past probably 10 years, they haven't allowed you to substitute, to use their money to substitute for your money so that you can in fact reduce your debt. They want to see incremental spending. So if there's more money being announced, what they would be looking for is for us to be increasing typically our capital program to deal with that, with those funds.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Moffat, please.
Thank you. I actually just wanted to provide some background, which would have been useful when Councillor Wilkinson was still here, but she had to step out. The motion that Councillor Harder has, that Councillor Egli is well aware of, Councillor Egli was here with myself, Councillor Cackerson. Between us, we talked about this quite a lot at Environment Committee. Of course, other members of this committee are on Environment Committee when this came up. The FCA, she presented, brought forward a suggestion regarding the hydro dividend, the surplus or hydro dividend. I know Angela Keller-Herzog is here as well. This came up at Environment Committee. This was discussed quite a bit at Environment Committee between the delegations, between the members of council. This is not a motion that was cooked up in some back room without letting anyone know. This was out in the open during that committee. There was direction from the committee and talk to then bring it back and see if we could look at this prior to council. I know there was a lot of interest amongst the councillors to see if there's something we could do. I believe it also came from, I think the motion says that, from the Environmental Stewardship Advisory Committee. To the notion that there was no discussion about this amongst council, that's inaccurate. Councillor Egli does not sit on the committee. He was here at the meeting. We all have the opportunity to come to these committee meetings, especially when we're dealing with budget. We were here for, I think, until 3:50 that day. We had many delegations on that and the energy evolution item. The energy evolution item is something that is important. It has a number of projects, 33 projects in there. 26 of those projects actually don't require any capital funding from the city. They just require staff time to help. Any additional money into that can help us achieve that goal of getting those projects up and running, which have the net benefit to the city. So the motion, in my mind, it's trying to find money to help these projects. It's money that we aren't currently accounting for. If it's there, fantastic. It allows us to put some extra money into energy evolution. If it's not there, then we have the status quo. But the reality is we aren't pulling other priorities in order to fund this. Thanks.
Yeah, that's good context. Thank you. Councillor Egli, please.
Well, first off, I'll start by saying what he said, because that is the context. That's at least for myself, and I believe for Councillor Moffat, and that's where our discussion started around these potential dollars, and I stress potential. We know we have a $20 million guarantee. We don't know whether it's above that, and if it's above that, what that amount will be. But what we do know for certain is whatever that amount is, whatever that dollar is, it's not a sustainable dollar. 1 year it could be nothing, the next year it could be 600,000, 300,000, whatever. We don't know. The cachet, if you will, of the two areas where the money is going to be or is proposed to be spent is these are areas where one-time money can do some good. Whether it's road resurfacing, once the project's done, it's done, or whether it's in the case of the environment projects. One of the things we had a good discussion about at the committee was the benefit of having some additional dollars in here so we can get all of the preliminary work done on the funding applications, on our cooperation with the other levels of government, so we have work in the pipe. And that was a point that was made very forcefully by FCA and some of the other groups that certainly resonated with me and with Councillor Moffat, as to make the projects that we want to have happen, there's lead time. You have to build up to it. And this money, if it's available, will allow us to do that and to get some of those projects going, make it possible for us to access other levels of government's funding to move these things ahead. So I think it's very important to note that, as I say, it is essentially one-time money. So to my mind, we should spend in places where we're going to get the biggest bang for the buck. To dangle money in front of a group or a project and then pull the carpet out from under them a couple of months down the road because that money anymore doesn't seem to me to be a reasonable or fair way to use the money that might be available to us. I think we should use the money in such a way as we know we're going to get a benefit from it. It'll be a defined benefit. And next year we can look at it again and see what opportunities might be out there next year. But this year, these are priorities that people have raised at budget consultations, that people have raised at meetings of committees, and I think it's a reasonable and prudent way to look at spending money.
Thank you, Councillor Egley. Councillor Chernyshenko, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Up then where Councillor Egley and Moffat have led us into this. I do support this motion. It is an unusual motion. You could say it's an unusual motion for unusual times. Certainly the state of our existing road network as a result of quite astounding series of freeze-thaws that we're now seeing puts us in the position we are in of road resurfacing. And then when it comes to projects that fall under evolution strategy, we have a particular opportunity to leverage that money with quite significant a set of provincial programs and federal ones, almost all of which require the city to put up its share of that funding in order to match, but often those can be leveraged 3, 5, even 10 times the amount that we put in. So the fact that it is one time is not a bad thing in this case. Of course, in the case of both the state of our roads and our very rapidly changing climate, these aren't one-offs. We can expect to need to invest this kind of money in the future too, but that is something that we need to anticipate and work towards. Here we have an opportunity to put some money in now to support that. You might find it unusual that I would be supporting money for roads. Some already have and may continue to point that out. But I have to remind absolutely everyone, including myself, that when I'm on my bicycle, as I often am, I don't think anyone could be more vulnerable to a pothole or a state of the road than someone on a bicycle. That can often be not just a fender bender or a rim bender, it can be a fatal situation when you hit a deep pothole that's full of water and you really don't know what's there. Same thing with a bus that's delayed because of the state of the roads. Anyone that's carpooling, any of us who are aspiring to own an electric vehicle, all of those are important parts of our mode change and our transition to cleaner transportation, but require our road network and our path network to be in good state. So there isn't as great a contradiction. There may not even be any contradiction here, but there certainly isn't as great a contradiction in seeing these two put together in this motion. So I am pleased to support this and thank everyone for doing the work on it. Should there be surplus money coming out of the hydro dividend? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hubly, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I can agree with most of what my colleague from the Environment Committee just said, which is good. I appreciate his points. My concern with this, I will support motion too. I think if there is a surplus, it's good to have a plan for what we're going to do with it. Certainly, I think we've all heard from residents that roads has to be a bigger priority for this council. That, as Councillor Chernyshenko pointed out, roads are not just for cars, they're also for cyclists, and it's how we get our goods and services moved around the city and create our economic development to pay for all the other things that maybe are on our wish list. So I support that. My concern is on both the roadside and the other one-third of the spending on what's being referred to as energy evolution. Are we going to get a chance to, or someone's going to do some analysis on these projects to make sure that we're picking the best of the bunch to get the most, as Councillor Sheroshenko said, 5 times leveraging our money? That's another project that can leverage that money even higher. Like I think, for example, about street lights. We're seeing that getting rolled out. It's a great initiative with Ottawa Hydro. It's making a difference in our communities, especially when we start getting into LED lighting in the pathways. It's a huge increase in safety for our pedestrians and a big savings for us that goes to provide money down the future. And we don't always get a chance to do that. So I'm hoping, I'd like to hear from maybe whoever Mr. Ganalakis wants to answer that.
I think Mr. Willis, but the short answer, I believe, would be these issues go to the Environment Committee for final decision. But Mr. Willis, would like to comment?
Mr. Mayor, it's our intent to bring forward a report to Committee and Council in 2018 to propose the governance of the various plans forward. At that point, we can indicate what the specific direction where the money would be able to go in future years. So that's yet to be reported to Committee. The Energy Evolution Strategy still also needs to be adopted by Council, which is on the next agenda.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Ubley. Councillor Taylor, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. And I support Councillor Harder's motion for many of the reasons that we've heard around the table from different members today, not the least of which, you know, I understand I get complaints about roads in my ward as well, and roads are clearly a need. Also, being part of Councillor Chernyshenko's committee, I understand the requirement for energy evolution movement. It's someplace where we continue to get prodded by the public about our doing more of our share to address climate change and climate protection. And so I think you know, investing in these areas is wise. To Councillor Eagleye's point, the nice thing is it offers us the opportunity to use one-time money for one-time projects, things that have a definite endpoint. I don't want to discard Councillor Wilkinson's very well-meaning point, and I think she's coming from a very good place. I think each and every one of us has heard the need for on-ramp funding for social service agencies, or for that need to be addressed, and I suspect that at Councillor D, you know, that'll be a vibrant part of the CPSC budget debate. I do, though, feel, just as Councillor Eagleye, and I think as you pointed out, Mr. Mayor, you know, there is a fallacy in using one-time funds for sustainable requirements. And you know, Councillor Wilkinson that, you know, I have housing concerns. I absolutely do. But chief among them, the one thing that the housing community tells politicians of every level at every opportunity is it must be sustainable and it must be predictable. You must be able to tell us how much and for how long we'll be able to receive this money in order to build, you know, a better sustainable housing. Also, you know, the experience with, we're calling it on-ramp funding, but you know, the experience with social service funding from any kind of startup fund has always been that it always takes causes longer to start up than is suspected. So, you know, when we get to the point where we're looking at on-ramp funding, I think it's going to have to be a longer ramp. It's going to have to be better padded with more money. It has to be sustainable. So I'm supportive of this motion today, and I don't see that in any way doing so, you know, negates support for the idea of on-ramp funding for social agencies. I think it's two different things.
Thank you. Councillor Deans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, there's certainly a shortage of places that we could spend this phantom fund, but in the budget, I think what we see today is indicative of the terrible state that our budget's actually in, and the fact that we're having this conversation about using any additional windfall from the hydro dividend to fund our critical infrastructure is just indicative of how serious the problem has become. And I heard one of my colleagues say that, you know, this has resulted from unusual freeze. Well, maybe in tiny little part that might be true, but the big part of $70 million annual infrastructure gap that we have between what we need to be spending and what we have been spending in critical infrastructure. And so I don't think there's a perfect answer to this. I mean, there are a number of budgets that need more money. Chief among them is that we have to deal with critical infrastructure, and that's just the find ourselves facing because we don't have enough money to deal with things like roads. And I think if there is to be a hydro windfall, that ultimately it should to forward-thinking projects like energy efficiency and things like that. And in part it will, but you know, it's hard to be forward-thinking when you just have roads in terrible state of repair and, you know, parks and everything else that aren't being properly funded. And so, you know, I think it's kind of like a household budget. You have to take care of the basics, and we aren't taking care of our basics right now to anywhere near the point that we should be. So if there is to be a little bit of money, perhaps this makes the most sense to spend it on the sort of bread and butter core issues in the city. So for that reason, I'm going to support Councillor Harder's motion.
Mr. Monette, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Basically, I will be supporting the motion also. We've all learned about the roads and infrastructures and how we need to do more. I think our council has been very aggressive in the approach in the past, and if funding becomes available, I think this would be the way to move forward. This does not discount what Councillor Wilson was saying. You know, there are many needs in the city of Ottawa, and social services definitely a need. Although if we water it down and try to do too much, try to distribute it too widely, what will happen is we will not be doing anything positive. We will just be passing a small amount all around the table. So I will be supporting the motion, and thank you for bringing it up.
Merci, conseiller. Any other comments? I have no one else on the list. So we'll go to the roadmap. Item 1 is elected officials operating resource requirement, page 28 in the budget book. Carried. Item 2 is city clerk and solicitor budget, pages 30, 31, and page 29. Carried. City manager's office operating resource requirement, page 32. Yeas and nays? Carried. Transportation services budget, A, O-Train construction, pages 34, 36, and page 33. Carried. Planning, infrastructure, and economic development department budget, office, page 38. Economic development and long-range planning, page 40, 42, and page 39. Carried. Service, innovation, and performance department budget, page 40. Page 44, page 45, page 46, and page 48, and page 47. Carried. Item number 7 is corporate services department budget excluding the information technology operating budget that was dealt with by the IT subcommittee. Page 49, page 51, 52, and page 50. And, sorry, page 53, page 54, page 57 and 56. Carried. Item 8, Fedco capital budget, page 61, 62, and pages 109 to 112, 116 to 120, and non-departmental 58 to 60. Carried. Councillor Harder's motion that we had quite a discussion on. Carried. Sorry. No. So on the budget as a whole, carried. Our next item is hotel and short-term accommodation tax. We have a presentation by the Deputy City Director, and we have a number of presenters who would like to speak to this. I believe it's over 15, I think. So thank you to all the staff who worked on the Fedco portion of the budget. Merci à tout le personnel qui travaille sur cette moitié de la budget pour 2018. So we have the treasurer and deputy treasurer, and then we'll go to presenters. Just to give you an idea of the sequence, Michael Crockett is first, Steve Ball is second, Nina Kressler is third, Ross Meredith, Ian Ferris, and then it goes on. So we have Ms. Stevenson is going to do the presentation. I believe we have a PowerPoint as well. So the floor is yours. Welcome. Bienvenue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm here to brief staff, to brief committee on staff's proposal for the municipal accommodation tax. Ontario granted authority in its 2017 budget, which was adopted on May 17th, for municipalities to impose a mandatory municipal accommodation tax, which I will refer to as a MAT this morning. Since the announcement, staff have been consulting with Ottawa Tourism and the Ottawa-Gatineau Hotel Association, which I will refer to as OGHA, to review the effects of the announcement and develop a plan to implement a mandatory hotel tax in Ottawa. Staff anticipated regulations to be issued in the summer of 2017, but they were considerably delayed. On November the 23rd, the MAT regulation was released and came into effect on December the 1st. The regulation provides a necessary framework for the implementation of the MAT in Ottawa. A report is before you today recommending the implementation of a MAT as of January 1st, 2018. Our deadlines are short, given the current agreements with the hotels to collect and remit the voluntary destination marketing fee expire at the end of December 2017. So a little bit of history. In 2004, the Ottawa-Gatineau Hotel Association, in conjunction with Ottawa Tourism, introduced a voluntary destination marketing fee, or a DMF. Approximately 50% of the hoteliers in Ottawa participate in the voluntary DMF program, and they represent 90% of the room stock in the city. The current voluntary DMF is 3% of the room portion of a guest's invoice, and it is the guest who pays that fee, not the accommodator. OGHA is seen as a leader in terms of the current DMF program it has in place and has the highest number of members participating in the voluntary DMF in Ontario. OGHA has a well-developed collection and remittance process, and the DMF currently raises approximately $8 to $9 million annually. The funds generated support Ottawa tourism sales, marketing, and destination development efforts to promote Ottawa as a top destination choice worldwide. The funds are not used to market any individual hotel. The hotel tax: fairness, certainty, and uniformity. Fairness: every eligible accommodator who benefits from Ottawa Tourism's sales, marketing, and destination development efforts should contribute its fair share. A playing field for all. Today, not all contribute, but all benefit from Ottawa Tourism's work to market Ottawa as a destination of choice. This tax would provide additional certainty and capacity to our tourism sector to attract more major events and conventions. It ensures uniformity and collection throughout all accommodators in Ottawa, offering visitors a consistent experience. There are net benefits across the board that stem from Ottawa tourism sales and promotion work. And this approach is very similar to that of a business improvement area, or a BIA, where all members, big or small, contribute toward the BIA's promotion and the marketing of the area. With the enactment of the changes to the Municipal Act, the Act allows municipalities to set the rate and adopt a mandatory MAT through a bylaw. Staff recommend that the accommodators be required to collect the MAT on a room portions of the guest invoices, and it be applied uniformly to all accommodators in the city, being hotels, motels, inns, bed and breakfasts, and online accommodations platforms such as Airbnb. The Act allows municipalities to designate an authorized agent to collect the MAT through a service agreement, and the staff recommend that the city appoint OGHA as one of the authorized agents to collect the MAT. OGHA has over 10 years of experience in collecting the DMF, as well as all the necessary administrative processes in place to collect on behalf of the city. It is the most efficient and practical approach to implementing the MAT. The city will manage the relationships and collection contracts with the online platforms such as Airbnb. The regulations prescribe how the proceeds are shared. Given there's a voluntary program in place today, we must keep the Tourism Authority whole. So this means moving forward into 2018, if this report is approved, the revenue sharing is deemed to be the amount collected received for the DMF revenue for the prescribed base year, which is 2017. And in subsequent years, it's the future or the previous fiscal adjusted year, along with an inflationary increase, which is based on an annual percentage change in Ontario's total tourism receipts, as published by the Ministry. The regulation ensures that the local tourism authority receives at least similar revenues that were generated by the voluntary DMF. And there are two subcommittees of Ottawa Tourism that are mandated to collect MAT funds. The city has a seat at these tables as it's a member of the board and the two subcommittees. And it's important to note that the city is not required to supplement the MAT if the base is not achieved. The recommendations in the report are to adopt a 4% municipal accommodation tax effective January 1st, 2018. Also to delegate the authority to the mayor and the city manager to negotiate and enter into the necessary agreements to implement the MAT, including the appointment of OGHA as an authorized collecting agent to share the revenue with the eligible tourism entity, which is Ottawa Tourism, in a way that respects the provincial regulation. OGHA, Ottawa Tourism, Airbnb, and the Federation of Ontario B&B Accommodations are supporting recommendations in the report and the approach being proposed. Communication to the local community has commenced. A notification was mailed mid-November to all hoteliers, motels, B&Bs, as well as online platforms, making them aware of the possible changes. As soon as the report recommendations are approved by Council, the city will send an official notification to all accommodators. And we are also working in conjunction with Ottawa Tourism and OGHA to offer an information session on December the 19th for all accommodators to attend. And this session will provide the necessary toolkit to be ready for January 1st and 18. As part of the feedback from the B&B community, we've heard that additional time to implement the MAT, as well as a longer remittance period, and we are absolutely willing to work with them to facilitate the implementation process. Merci, Monsieur le Maire. C'est la fin de ma présentation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the end of my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Stephenson. We have a number, or not a number, but I believe 2 or 3 motions, and I thought it would be appropriate that we read them before we hear from the public so the public can hear what is before us. So Councillor El-Shantiri, and then Councillor Chernishenko, and I believe Councillor Moffat had a direction to staff. So Councillor El-Shantiri, if you'd like to introduce your motion so that members of the public can hear it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And if I could read my motion, it says, whereas the report entitled Hotel and Short-Term Accommodation Tax recommended a 4% municipal accommodation that further described in the report being effective January 1st, 2018, and where smaller bed and breakfast operator within the city who have not previously charged a destination marketing fee will now be required to change and collect accommodation tax in 2018 and have requested that the city provide direction on a portion charge for breakfast that might exempt from the invoice to reduce the administrative burden as they do not have a full-time accounting staff, and therefore be it resolved that the following recommendation 3 be added to the report, that the municipal accommodation tax bylaw include in document 2 provide that bed and breakfast operator may be exempt guests from paying the municipal accommodation tax on the breakfast portion of the invoice, which might be valued at 25% of the local gas. So, Mr. Mayor, if I can just put a little bit of contact with this. So some of the bed and breakfast, they offer more than just a breakfast, and I think we're going to hear from them. Some of them, they offer coffee, tea, energy bar. So I'm not sure if the 25% it is the right amount, but in speaking to a couple of operators, they said maybe it's around the right number, but I would like to hear from the people who present to us why 25%, if it's enough or it's not enough. I'm just wonder, Mr. Mayor, because let's see if they charge $75 for the room and the 2 breakfasts. I don't think you can have a nice big meal breakfast for less than $15, $20 per person. But anyway, I would like to hear from the presenter earlier, so I would leave that open.
Thank you very much. Merci. Councillor Chernyshenko, please, has a motion.
Yes, thank you. Similar item, of course. I'll get to the relevant parts. I'm just going to skip over those that are pretty much identical. Whereas smaller operators within the city have not previously charged a destination marketing fee, will now be required to charge and collect an accommodation tax in 2018, and have requested that the city allow a transition period in order to reduce the administrative burden on these operators who don't have full-time accounting staff, and to allow them to update their invoicing procedure implementation. Therefore, be it resolved that recommendation 1 of the report be replaced with the following. 1, adopt a 4% municipal accommodation tax on, not sure if the wording is here, on via bylaw effective January 1st, 2018, with a 60-day phase-in for accommodators of 10 rooms or less, which will be charged on the accommodation portion of their guest invoice, and delegate the authority to the mayor and city manager to negotiate and to enter into the necessary agreements consultation with the city clerk and solicitor to implement the mandatory municipal accommodation tax in the city of Ottawa. I think we may need to clean up that first sentence for grammar, but the main point is the 60-day phase-in period for accommodators of 10 rooms or less before the tax is implemented on them.
Okay. And Councillor Moffat, you are going to bring a direction to staff, if we can hear what that is before we ask the public to speak.
Thank you, and Ms. Stephenson is already aware of my intention to do this. It's just to direct staff to implement for bed and breakfast under 10 rooms a quarterly remittance process that aligns with the HST remittance to the Canada Revenue Agency in order to reduce the administrative burden on operators who don't have full-time accounting staff.
Okay, so that's understood, Ms. Stephenson?
Yes, very feasible.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a number of people who would like to speak to this item. The first is Michael Crockett, who is the president of Ottawa Tourism, followed by Steve Ball, the president of Ottawa-Gatineau Hotel Association. So, Michael, nice to have you here. Just push the button there and welcome.
Thank you very much, Mayor Watson. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today to express support for the municipal accommodation tax on behalf of Board of Directors, our members, and especially the 35 people that we have at Ottawa Tourism, all of whom are extremely passionate about this city and are dedicated to telling the rest of the world about it. Ottawa Tourism is a not-for-profit corporation. We exist to serve this industry and to serve this community and to enable significant economic impact from the visitor economy. Our industry-driven board of directors consists of community leaders representing all parts of the tourism industry, accommodators, the airport, the Shaw Centre, BIAs, the City of Ottawa, teams, attractions, service providers, both urban and rural. And we may be a not-for-profit, but tourism is an important business sector in this community, an important employer in Ottawa, and in one of Canada's and Ottawa's biggest export sectors. About $1.7 billion is in our community every year, supporting tens of thousands of jobs. We are a transparent, accountable, and inclusive membership-based organization. Our members include attractions, restaurants, retailers, festivals, transportation providers, meeting facilities, tour companies, many suppliers. Our membership also includes accommodators of all kinds, like most hotels in the city, many B&Bs, campgrounds, hostels. We currently have well over 400 members, which is the most we've ever had in the history of our organization, and we take this strong endorsement from the industry. Today, the largest source of revenue for Ottawa Tourism is the voluntary 3% destination marketing fee collected by hotels in the city. Each of our sales and marketing teams operates within a committee that consists of member stakeholders. These 3 sales and marketing committees, marketing, conventions, and travel trade, participate in the business planning, directly in the business planning and budgeting process for each of these DMF-supported departments within Ottawa Tourism. And these committees are also very inclusive. In fact, every member who expressed interest this year in being on one of our committees now serves on one of our committees. And layered on top of this committee structure are 3 additional checks and balances for our organization. Our DMF-supported budget is also scrutinized by our Sales and Marketing Council, consisting of the committee chairs, and subsequently double approved by both the Destination Marketing Program Management Committee, consisting of a number of accommodation stakeholders and non-accommodation representation, and also our full board of directors, again with broad representation across our sector. It's important to note that at the end of any given year, if any of the budgeted amount is unspent, we actually return that to the Destination Marketing Program Management Committee and need to rebudget for it in the future. It's a strong governance model that holds us accountable for what we spend and how we spend it. And so what do we do with that funding that we receive? We sell Ottawa. Our marketing team is active in traditional, even more active now in the digital and social world. And just to be clear, we sell visitors on coming to the destination, not on any particular place where they should sleep when they're here. And our team works with media outlets the world over, bringing writers to Ottawa. This year, you may know that we've been in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, Vogue, the Toronto Star, Montreal Gazette, the UK Guardian, and so many more. But what you might not know is that these things don't just happen. Usually it's our team that's been working with writers for months leading up to a writer deciding to come to Ottawa and write about our community. Our travel trade team works with tour operators around the world who cater to both groups and individual travelers. We're active primarily in North America, Western Europe, and China. Our meetings and conventions team had a record year, attracting meetings of all sizes to our community. Events like the Federation of Municipalities and the Association of Municipalities of Ontario had huge impacts here in Ottawa in 2017. We thank the city for its role in helping us to attract those events. And this year, the Major Events Fund, a partnership with the City of Ottawa, supported the attraction, again, of a record number of events. The Grey Cup, Women's Open, the Canadian Track and Field Championships, the Davis Cup, the Roar of the Rings right now at the Canadian Tire Centre, the NHL 100 Classic. These events come here thanks in part to the work and support of our Major Events team. We're also in the business of destination development. Our team, with the guidance from our Tourism Development Council, has a long-term focus on making Ottawa a more attractive destination in the future, as you heard from Mr. Willis this morning, enhancing the visitor's experience in the future. This also includes our Rural Tourism Committee. All parts of the city are represented on this committee, and all parts of the city have opportunities to be involved and to benefit. And all of this activity is made possible by the DMF today. And it can be even stronger and more sustainable through the Municipal Accommodation Tax. So we're in support of the tax because it makes sense. It's the right time to transition from the voluntary DMF to a mandatory tax that levels the playing field and de-risks a major funding source. We think it's well thought out by the province, and it really does fit well here in our environment in Ottawa. We also believe that for any tax explicitly on visitors, that the proceeds make sense to be collected and reinvested in promoting and developing tourism in Ottawa. This system rewards success. With more, we can do more. We can expand our sales and marketing in an industry that's driven by sales and marketing. We can invest more in destination development, and we can find ways critically to sustain some of the successful tourism events from 2017. And it's our commitment and inclusive to offer opportunities for the industry to engage, to be involved, to give us their insight and guidance, and to work together to maximize the economic impact of the visitor economy here in our community. So thank you, Mayor Watson.
Thank you very much. Questions to the delegation? Councillor El-Shantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Michael, for all your work in 2017, and congratulations to your team. And I know you said in your presentation you don't direct where resident or when visitors go, but I would like you to promote, when you are promoting, other than just the core of the city, because you know, we met with you before, concern from the rural resident about their rural destination, and now we're adding this, the bed and breakfast, and I think I would say a lot of them located outside the core of the city. So I would like to see more done to promote those businesses as they come to the stream, because now there's an expectation from them to, on your part, to be included in your promotion.
I totally agree with you, Councillor. In fact, one of our B&B members is in the Forest Retreat. B&B is a paying member of Ottawa Tourism, so we do understand the value of working with those rural members. And our Rural Tourism Committee has really been reinvigorated in the last couple of years. We have, the Diefenbunker is one of the members of that committee, but also in the South End and in Prescott Russell as well. So we take that seriously. We take your advice very seriously too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Engelai, please.
Yeah, just building on that theme a little bit, Michael. So I take from the answer you just gave that you do have bed and breakfast as part of your organization. How actively involved were those members in this discussion leading to you coming here today saying, we think this is a good idea?
So yes, we do have bed and breakfast members. There's at least 5 off the top of my head. I don't know the exact number, but 5 that I can think of off the top of my head. And this is not something that we've been talking about broadly with our membership. This has been really more of a board discussion and with our stakeholders with the city. But as I said during my presentation, there are innumerable opportunities for every member to get involved with us, whether it's at the committee level or other levels as well. And I think most of these bed and breakfast operators who are members of Ottawa Tourism have chosen not to do that, with one exception, who does sit on our Rural Tourism Committee.
So we have a number of speakers after you. A lot of them are bed and breakfast operators. I guess this is a dual opportunity for you, this audience, that audience.
Absolutely.
So if you're supporting a position that would impose a tax on their revenue that they previously haven't had to pay, both for our benefit and theirs, what's your case? What's the added value that this group of in the tourism industry is going to get out of that additional money going towards your organization?
Yeah, I'll say two things. One, it's not a tax on their revenues. It's the visitor who's paying the tax. So it's not there's not an actual tax on the.
Sorry, what I meant was it potentially has an impact on their.
Yeah, fair enough.
How they operate.
Yeah, and so I think the three items that Wendy talked about are really important. But from the Ottawa tourism perspective, what the three things I think that are most important for us are that it gives us the opportunity to invest more in sales and marketing around the world. People are coming to our community. We can grow the visitor economy here, which supports not just hotels, but also B&Bs, also campgrounds, also hostels, and a lot of people who stay with friends and relatives as well. So it supports the restaurants and everybody else in our business. The second piece that does for Ottawa tourism and for this community is it enables us to do more things like the wayfinding project on destination development. This is a relatively new responsibility for Ottawa tourism. We've really only had it for a couple of years. We've really only had a person dedicated to it for a couple of years. We've shown some incredible successes in that area, and I think the wayfinding project is one of the most amazing examples where you can bring together about 20 different stakeholders on one project and get them united behind that. And the third thing I'll say, and maybe this is the most timely, is we have a once-in-a-generation transition taking place right now from these incredible mega events that we had in 2017. And we have a strategy going forward to try and bring some of those back either in 2018 on an annual basis or in future years on an irregular basis for some of the bigger and more expensive ones. More resources enable us to do more of that activity and sustain more of that legacy impact of 2017. And the last thing I'll say on that topic is certainly all of the industry has benefited from things like our collective investment in the 2017 celebrations and events that have taken place in this community. I think if you quizzed some of the B&Bs in the Glebe and asked them how they did during Grey Cup week, I suspect they did pretty well.
Mr. Mayor, I take it we're saving our questions for staff until after the delegations? Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Deans, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What percentage of the revenue from this hotel tax would come from bed and breakfast?
I would have no way of estimating that. It depends on a lot of things, like the number of bed and breakfasts that there are in the rates that they're charging, the occupancy levels that they have. Some of them are seasonal. It's just not information that I have, but I would say a relatively small portion of the overall total.
How would you go about implementing it if you don't know who's out there?
Yeah, so Ottawa Tourism won't be the implementers of the tax. So it's the city and OGHA would have the relationship with the individual accommodators in that case.
Okay, and you didn't feel a need to consult before you decided to request this additional mandatory tax?
Yeah, I think we've been consulting with the city staff and with our major stakeholders.
No, but you said you didn't consult with the bed and breakfast.
Well, there's no broader consultation with our members, for instance, because this was something that the regulations didn't even exist for until 2 weeks ago as well.
But you couldn't proactively try and reach them?
this is not something that we were putting out to our members saying, hey, this is something that is happening, because we didn't know what was happening. We didn't know the rules that were going to be around it as well. So all we knew was what was in the budget, and we've been very, I think, very open to saying support shifting from the voluntary tax to, or a voluntary fee to a mandatory tax.
Okay, and then when you were talking about the continuation of some of the 2017 events, what's your focus on that? Have you decided which ones you want to continue?
So no, but what we have started doing is in direct consultation with Ottawa 2017, with the city, with some of our other partners, we have started talking about which ones have had the biggest tourism impact, and we have some of those numbers now where we're starting to be able to see which ones actually did move the needle. And we are hiring an Ottawa 2017 transition manager, which will help us put together the for which of those events had the biggest tourism impact, and start to prioritize some of those, and then figure out what the business case is and the business plan for bringing them back, because some of them require quite a bit of investment to sustain in future years too.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor.
Okay, thank you very much. Next is Steve Ball, President of Ottawa-Gatineau Hotel Association, followed by Nina Kressler, President of the Shaw Centre, and then Ross Meredith, GM of the Westin. So Steve, as many of you know, Steve was our co-chair at 2017, in addition to being responsible for the Hotel Association. The floor is yours. Just push the button, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning. Thank you for being here this morning. You know, hearing people speak, maybe to put in a little context, it brought me back to my days, my publishing days. I was on the board of directors of Ottawa Tourism from 1990, I believe, until 2005, when I left to go to the CMA. And during that time, I served for the last 3 years as the treasurer of Ottawa Tourism. And one of the functions the board wanted me to do was to forecast out what Ottawa Tourism was going to look like under our current funding model. And I recall very clearly one of our recommendations, probably our strongest recommendation, was to shut it down. We quite literally, without long-term sustainable funding, it made no sense to continue Ottawa Tourism back in the day the way it was functioning. Thank goodness that didn't happen, and thank goodness the hoteliers pulled together and voluntarily decided to commit 3% of their revenue to independent funding. The 11,500 rooms that are available in the region, that's about 85%. We've got 5 members in Gatineau. We represent about 6,000 employees through our membership, and we've got 44 DMF collectors, 4 of which are not members, but they collect as well. So what I think is important to illustrate today is OGHA is an advocacy organization. These hotels are very competitive on the street, but they pull together for the big picture and a recognition that sales and marketing is the lifeblood of the future of tourism in Ottawa. So they set up a DMF management committee to actually manage the transfer of the funds to Ottawa Tourism. And this DMF management committee has representation from hoteliers from across the city, representation from the key marketing committees of Ottawa Tourism, and those represent leisure, meetings and travel trade, and rural tourism. It's got representation from the Ottawa Tourism Board, and I sit on it myself as a non-voting member. And this is the group that actually works with Ottawa Tourism to build the strategic marketing plans, to execute on the short-term and long-term strategies. And they're also accountable back to the OGHA board in terms of the success of these plans and whether or not they actually were executed in the way they were, or the way they were planned to. So it's a hybrid group in between OGHA and the Ottawa Tourism Board, and it plays a very important role of independence. Why is this important? It was critical to build industry engagement and to be able to renew the DMF program on a 3-year basis, and to not have any one independent property looking to be influencing any kind of the expenditures. So our recommendation is moving to a tax model. The OGHA is completely behind this, as Michael and Wendy so aptly presented. It presents consistency, it presents uniformity, but it creates long-term sustainable funding But we're strongly recommending that we follow the similar governance model because it's been so successful. In fact, Ottawa is looked at as a best practices model across the province. When we were talking to the province about instituting the MAT, they were very transparent and cooperative. Ottawa was looked at as the best example, and I've presented actually to 6 different municipalities about what our model looks like, and they all would like to be able to follow that same governance structure. So I think that's all I'd like to say today, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to clearly indicate that OGHA is an advocacy organization. It's a not-for-profit. It's really the DMP Management Committee where the rubber hits the road. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Blais, please, to the delegation.
Thanks very much. My question is, from your perspective, how is the tax or the fee, whatever you want to call it, going to work for your members that aren't within the city of Ottawa? So your members in Gatineau or your members in Rockland or Russell, et cetera, they're going to benefit from the marketing, et cetera, that this tax will fund, but are they going to be paying the tax?
Yeah, so I'll address the Gatineau members first. In Quebec, they have their own provincial tax of 3.5%. So the Quebec hotels and members have never been a participant in the DMF program, but they certainly are a participant in Ottawa Tourism, and they support various programs that Ottawa Tourism may do. Regarding the tax, anybody that falls outside of the boundaries of the City of Ottawa will not be part of our program.
And the 3.5% that your Gatineau members pay, where does that money go?
It goes to the provincial government, and they've got a scheme for disseminating it to the various municipalities. And that was a model we talked to the province about years ago.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Eglai, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question of clarification. Mr. Crockett corrected me when I used the word part of the bed and breakfast revenue. He said it wasn't revenue, it was an additional. But when you were giving the background, you said the hotel owners came together and decided to contribute 3% of their revenue. So does this change the model from what you're currently doing, or are we using revenue in a different way?
That's a great question. So the DMF program is designed specifically for participants to commit 3% of their room revenue carte blanche. Whether they actually pass that on to the guest or not is totally up to them. Most of them follow the provincial guidelines that have been set years ago, which recommends transparency and clearly insists that if you're in the DMF program, that appears on your invoice. I would suggest to you in Ontario, 100% of them do pass it on to the guest. In a tax model, it's entirely different in that this is something that is not an option and wouldn't follow the same guidelines.
So effectively, in both scenarios, the guest is paying over and above what the room rate is, effectively.
Yes, but in a DMF program, the program could not dictate to the property how they went about either charging the guest the tax or paying it within their own marketing fees or however they did it. There was no authority to be able to dictate to a participant what they did with the guest.
So I just want to follow up a little bit on what Councillor Blais was asking about the 3.5% on the Gatineau side. So they won't be required to contribute to this at all, correct?
Nobody outside of the confines of the City of Ottawa.
Okay. But the advertising, if you will, the benefit of this fund is going to be on both sides of the border, is it not?
Well, I hope so. In fact, I know Michael's he's been building a very good relationship with Tourism Outaouais, and I would hope that they will do some joint marketing programs to promote the region. I think that's a real strength that we have, two different cultures. But in terms of how they're funded, they'll be funded independently from however each side of the river collects their funds.
And maybe I should have asked this question, Mr. Crockett, but for the Gatineau businesses that are part of the great organization, how do they fund? They don't I'm assuming don't contribute the voluntary 3% now towards this. So do you know how they fund their participation in the endeavors of, again, perhaps I should have asked Mr. Crockett, but in the endeavors of his organization?
I don't think there's a funding mechanism for businesses beyond hotels to contribute to tourism funding. Maybe, do you want to bring Michael back?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So, Councillor, sorry, just to make sure I understand the question clearly, you're asking how Gatineau organizations participate in Ottawa tourism?
How they, if they participate, and if so, how they participate financially, because they don't pay this 3%.
Right, so no hotels participate directly with us, but attractions and service providers certainly do, and they pay through a membership fee, as do other Ottawa-based businesses who aren't accommodators. We have a membership base that pays us revenue as well. Small piece of the overall revenue, though.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Next is Nina Kressler, President of the Shaw Centre, followed by Ross Meredith from the Weston, and then Ian Ferris. Welcome, Nina.
Thank
Had
you.
a good year, I understand.
We had a wonderful year. Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here this morning, Mr. Wishart, and the FEDCO committee. So on behalf of the Shaw Centre, it has been a great year, and the Shaw Centre has been a great addition to the City of Ottawa, generating annually $90 million in economic impact to the City of Ottawa and to the province of Ontario. We recognize the need to develop new markets as well as maintain and grow our current markets. This new market opportunity will come from the international convention sector, but we are not alone in recognizing this lucrative market. Halifax, Toronto, Quebec City, Montreal, Calgary, and Vancouver are heavily vested in the international conventions market and have been for many, many years. Our collaborative sales and marketing efforts with Ottawa Tourism have been strategic and focused, however, require greater frequency and resources to compete against other cities internationally. Replacing the DMF with the MAT will allow our success to grow even more, in turn generating higher economic impact, more jobs, greater visitation, and pride of place. This tax will be generated from our visitors. These visitors are already accustomed to paying such a tax when they visit other cities for leisure or for business. The MAT will level the playing field by having all accommodation providers who benefit from Ottawa tourism sales and marketing efforts contribute. MAT, as a tax on tourism, should be reinvested in attracting and securing major events, conventions, tourists, and fund Ottawa 2017 legacy events, as well as destination development. The municipal accommodations tax has industry support and is the best way to build on Ottawa's success through greater sales and marketing efforts, which in turn will position our city well to compete on the global stage for new business. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions for the delegation? Nope, thank you very much. Next is Ross Meredith, GM of the Weston Hotel. Hello, Ross, welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good afternoon. Are we there? Good afternoon. May I start by just thanking the full City Council and this Council for your past support for tourism. You've been a great partner to our industry, so thank you very much. I sit here as the General Manager of the Western Ottawa and also as the Chair of the Board of Ottawa Tourism. I have no notes, so I won't use my 5 minutes. That's a gift to all of us, but I'll just share sort of a couple of quick thoughts. And really, what I think this new tax model does is provide a certainty for funding for our tourism organization. There was always the potential risk of the voluntary tax or the voluntary participation program collapsing. You just never knew if and when there would be full participation of those partners. So what this is now will allow our friends at Ottawa Tourism is the ability to look out 2 and 3 years out and be able to be in a position to make presentations, to make proposals, to incent and to try and secure future long-term tourism activities and events coming to the city. There's no doubt that there's an enormous amount of pride that residents of Ottawa have when there's big, high-profile events coming in and into the city. And this long-term funding agreement will allow Ottawa Tourism the ability to make some commitments farther out with the confidence of funding certainty. And then just the other piece I just wanted to address or just talk a little bit about was, the benefit, who benefits from the tourism growth. Well, obviously, outside of our direct tourism partners, the related businesses, there's certainly enormous benefit. But even within the hospitality and the hotel and the accommodation providers, what typically happens is that the downtown core often fills early or first, and then the compression goes outward. And as an example of what happened in 2017, to your point, Ms. Councillor, what happened in 2017 was the downtown core's occupancy was up a little bit, but it wasn't that material. Where the huge gains came in hotels, I would think B&Bs, but certainly in hotels and accommodation providers, was the accommodation lift was enormous outside of the downtown core, which was phenomenal. So it made this a citywide win. So now when we're talking about Red Bull Crashed Ice, or we're talking about outdoor games, or Roar of the Rings, the entire hospitality community in all four quadrants of the city are benefiting from it. And those numbers, and Michael can certainly share them, but those numbers were staggering as we reviewed most recently at our board meeting. So I think that continued investment in hospitality will only equally support those business operations outside of downtown as much as downtown. So thank you very much and appreciate your past support.
Great, thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much. Next is Ian Ferris, CEO of Chamber of Commerce, followed by Debbie Bernhardt, Windsong Manor Bed and Breakfast.
Thank you again, Your Worship. Good to be back. The Ottawa Chamber of Commerce is working with our 700-plus members from multiple industries, and we represent over 27,000 employees. We work diligently to identify those priorities for economic growth and expansion, and work with other stakeholders. Tourism development in Ottawa is certainly one of those priorities. Ottawa's made significant gains in the past few years, particularly through the work of Ottawa Tourism and their creative strategies to enhance the visitor experience, and through the work of the Tourism Development Council, of which Mr. Crockett mentioned, which the Ottawa Chamber is a proud member. In a matter of a few weeks, when we close the curtains on Ottawa 2017 celebrations, we'll be able to take stock of our city, our communities, and the institutions that make it so great. Now and at that time, we'll cherish the natural physical beauty of the National Capital Region, one that brings outdoor enthusiasts to our city throughout all four seasons. We'll continue to be thankful for the public sector investments from all three levels of government that have been made over the years into arts and cultural infrastructure, all of which underpin a tourist offering that rivals other world-class cities. We'll also continue to be blessed to have the entrepreneurial spirit and business acumen within our private sector that has attracted and leveraged major investments in Ottawa, including multi-sport complexes, modern transportation hubs, shopping centers, and entertainment venues. This is also true of our tourism sector that counts hundreds of entrepreneurs, such as festival operators, tour guide companies, and B&B proprietors, all taking risks for their business, all that benefit from effective tourism marketing and development activities. All contribute to a lively tourism sector that continues to outpace its competitors in a sustainable, smart way and contributes to a vibrant brand Ottawa. In terms of the proposal for the new municipal accommodation tax before the committee today, we'd like to commend the local hotel industry through the Ottawa-Gatineau Hotel Association and its members and their guests who have been contributing much of the tourism funding in Ottawa since the adoption of the HST in Ontario. I'd also like to note the significant contributions that this council and the City of Ottawa continue to make to tourism destination development, particularly through funding sources for Ottawa Tourism and the Tourism Development Council. The current voluntary 3% destination marketing fee has been somewhat successful locally, but as the city staff report states, only approximately 50% of local hotels participate, and I would suggest that this revenue stream is isolated in terms of contributions from emerging accommodation sources that are disrupting the traditional economic model. The Ottawa Chamber has appeared before City of Ottawa committees to call for equitable treatment in terms of industries disrupted by new technologies and business practices. We feel that the implementation of a mandatory 4% MAT to replace the existing voluntary DMF would provide a measure of equity for the sector that includes incumbent hotel providers and the emerging accommodation sector. With widespread participation, we do not feel that any subsector of the accommodation market would be unduly burdened. In fact, all accommodation service providers will benefit from tourism marketing efforts that contribute to attracting tourists who spend $1.7 billion in Ottawa annually. This is simply good for business. At the outset of my remarks, I mentioned that the Chamber mandate is to work towards and promote economic growth and expansion by replacing a voluntary contribution paid by a few with a source of much-needed revenue to be dedicated to tourism development. We believe the business sector, our local communities, and citizens will be better off. Again, one only need to look at the successful Ottawa 2017 event calendar that not only contributed to economic growth and expansion locally, but also to codifying a new brand for Ottawa that we can leverage going forward. Together, we are building a sustainable, world-class G7 capital city that has a modern transportation system, significant cultural and sports tourism assets, and a splendid natural beauty, all that provide a platform for long-term growth in our community. What we need now is a dedicated source of tourism development funding that is equitable across its major beneficiary, the accommodation sector, and a system that does not unduly burden that economic engine. We think that a 4% municipal accommodation tax is that source and helps build on the platform for growth and expansion. Thank you for allowing me to present.
Great, thank you very much. Any questions? Councillor El-Shantiri.
Well, first of all, Ian, thank you very much for your leadership and being here this morning also to speak on two items. Obviously, there's some of the concern is about the bed and breakfast. That's, I think, where we heard the most. I know there's a sustainable funding coming for the hotel, and that's good news for what you folks do or what they do, Tourism Ottawa, because when you are in Europe or even in the Middle East, you'll see those ads, welcome to Ottawa, and it's great. So we know they're working, they're inviting. We're really, folks, I'm trying to understand, like, there's only 45 registered bed and breakfasts within the city limit. And some of them seasonal, we heard from Michael, some of them small, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 bedroom, I'm not sure how many. So what is the expectation from these small amount? Like, what are we trying to achieve from that small group? That's what because when you offer value for money, people understand, hey, that's value for money, you know, we're going to benefit from this. I need you to just bring it up. Like, what is the expectation?
Well, thank you for the question. Certainly from my perspective and the Chamber, we see that we want to have a vibrant message going outside of Ottawa. Most of the work that Ottawa Tourism undertakes is outside the city, and residents don't see that because, of course, it's trying to attract visitors. Bringing those visitors, they'll stay in hotels, they'll stay in bed and breakfast, they'll stay in Airbnb, many different venues. And I think it's to their benefit. Those small bed and breakfasts will benefit from the efforts to bring more more visitors to Ottawa. And I know the mayor is quite fond of championing the number of visitors that were targeted in 2017, and hopefully we'll keep those numbers up for future years. But the more effort that we can do to bring visitors to Ottawa, I think will benefit everyone.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ian. Debbie Bernhardt from Winsong Manor Bed and Breakfast, followed by Carol Waters of, I don't know if this is Australia or Australis Bed and Breakfast. So welcome, if you can just push the button there and...
So good morning, Mr. Mayor and councillors, and thank you for the opportunity for speaking this morning. I do represent Winsong Manor. It's a small bed and breakfast out on Corkery Road in West Carleton. One thing I want to mention is that currently, right now, under the current membership requirements for OGHA, we are not allowed to join them because their membership is only for entities with 50 or more rooms. So we're going to be paying money to an association that we can't even join. I have had a conversation with Mr. Ball, and he did say that anything's on the table, but there's no guarantees that we can join that association. So I just want to say that as a small 3-room family-run bed and breakfast, we're lucky to generate $35,000 in any given year. That would represent $1,400 in MAT that would be generated for funding tourism, and that amount, in my mind, is immaterial, as my understanding is OGHA currently generates close to $10 million from current accommodation tax. To our guests, this $1,400 is significant. Most of our visitors, our guests, are either young people or seniors, and they're trying to stretch the dollar as much as they can. So an extra, and I'm going to say 4.52%, because as a B&B that earns $35,000, I'm an HST registrant, and I have to charge 13% on the 4%, and that's by no fault of anybody in this room. That's a CRA requirement. We have been in business since October 2014, and since then we have had 0 price increases. Even in 2017, because our guests are so price sensitive, we had the opportunity. We could have probably raised our rates. I know hotels raised their rates quite a bit in 2017. We did not, because we know how price sensitive our guests are. The comment that the tax does not impact local citizens is not so. Most of our guests, I looked at our data, because we do keep data on our guests. Most of our guests are attending weddings in the area. They're not here for tourism reasons. We get a lot of what I call overflow, where families are visiting families, and they've only got so many bedrooms in their home, so people are coming to stay to visit their families. I also get quite a few business stays that people in that end of town, they're not here for tourism, they're here for doing business in Canada. We have expenses that our hotel competitors do not have, as we are a bed and breakfast. We do offer breakfast, and that's being addressed with this amendment to the motion. But there's also other things we offer. We actually offer a free shuttle service because we're close to the Canadian Tire Centre. We're concerned about guests going to the game and drinking, so what we do is we take them there, no charge, drop them off, and pick them up when the game's over, and that way they don't have to worry about drinking and driving. So we're keeping everybody safe. That's an expense, and we don't charge for that. We also offer, as somebody mentioned before, free soft drinks, free coffee, free tea, and so there's things that we offer that the hotels don't offer. They actually charge and make money on those things. What I'd like to propose is the Alberta model, where they actually exempt. They have the same thing, but they exempt anything with less than 4 rooms, and that is what I would like to propose, the direction that we go in, because the B&B industry is very small. The amount of revenue that we're talking about here is very insignificant, and that is what I would like to propose. But failing that, if you do put this through, I also like the amendment with more time. 60 days I don't think is enough. We have to update our online invoicing. We have to possibly even produce invoices, which we don't now, showing a separate line with this tax. We have to deal with Expedia, because we were on Expedia, and we have to get them to update for this tax. So there's quite a bit of work to do. Anyways, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Excuse me, Councillor Harder, please.
I have some questions for you. So from an administrative perspective, what kind of cost do you think that's going to incur? Like if you were to value your time, which you should value your time, to do all the things you just said with the Expedia, et cetera, and you know, all of those things?
Well, just the actual, the administrative, the cost, if you want to say what my time is worth, you know, I would say it's probably $1,000 in cost there, just to administrate, to get everything ready in my time. There's also administrating. Somebody suggested we pay quarterly because we pay HST quarterly. I actually pay HST annually. I don't pay my HST quarterly. So there would be 4 times a year that I have to sit and do a calculation, so that's work there.
So, and you said you have 3 rooms that you... 3
rooms. That by city law, that's all we're allowed. Anything more than 3 rooms would be considered an inn, and we fall under different municipal law, so...
So, and you're not allowed to be a member, you said?
Of OGHA. Currently, if you read their membership requirements, you must have 50 rooms or more.
50?
50. Currently.
So have, okay, so I'm going to be asking staff so they can think about this. whether you looked at thresholds and best practices and that sort of thing, because from an administrative, that's why I asked you about your administrative costs, because I'm sure that the administrative cost that we would have would probably surpass that for a 3-room place. I think we've got to have a look at that through a microscope that is rational. I think that it's very different what you're doing than, than what some others are doing. And if you cannot become a member, and I'm sure there'd be a cost in becoming a member as well.
That I don't know.
Yeah, I don't either. Anyway, I'll be looking for that from staff. Thank you.
So you can join Ottawa Tourism, can you not?
Yes, if I knew what the cost is, because nobody's ever asked me to join, and keeping in mind we have, we try to keep our costs down as much as possible, so it depends on the cost of joining Ottawa Tourism.
So one of the dilemmas we have is that if we exempt bed and breakfast, how do we not exempt Airbnb, which is growing at a massive rate?
So,
and
good question.
The Airbnb people have already said that they're willing to participate in this, and there are other problems with Airbnb, but one of the advantages I guess you have is that you're running a business, but you're paying just residential property tax.
Correct. That's with the 3 rooms, less than 3 rooms, that we don't have to pay any business taxes. That's under
So
the law.
on the Airbnb issue, what's your
Well, and this is
take on it?
where, that's an entirely different thing. I think most of the B&B owners in the room, and I'll call them true B&B owners, Airbnbs are not a B&B, because one of the Bs is missing. Most Airbnbs do not serve breakfast, so we do not consider them as true B&B owners. Airbnb is a different animal.
Yeah, but they're causing quite a bit of disruption. They're
Well,
the
it's just like Uber
hotel
to the taxi
business
service.
without owning a hotel room.
It's a disruptor. And I'm not saying I'm against Airbnb, I'm just saying that we have to look at them differently. We actually pay for commercial insurance. I can almost guarantee you that Airbnb owners do not have commercial insurance.
Yeah. Councillor El-Shantiri, please.
Good afternoon, Debbie, and thank you for being here and waiting this morning to speak about this. Obviously, and I want to thank you also for offering a drive to the Canadian Tire Center and drive back to your guests. That's really nice of you to do. If I know that, maybe I should book a room in your place. The question I asked earlier, and I worked with your folks on bed and breakfast, about the breakfast portion of the cost. Do you think 25% of the total cost, is that fair to about the food?
I think it is, but then others might disagree. It depends on what they're serving.
Well, some people serve full breakfast, as you know, like...
I serve a full breakfast, but if you're serving like smoked salmon, one of the things that I serve that's quite expensive, especially during the winter, is fresh fruit. So it depends on the time of the year, what you're serving. It's very hard to gauge.
And I heard from the bed and breakfast we have about, because there's no registry, it's hard to know, but I heard it's about between 40 to 45 bed and breakfast within the city limit.
Well, if you go to Expedia, actually, there's a listing for inns and B&Bs, and there's 53. Now, that's inns and B&Bs. That's on Expedia. Not every inn or B&B is on Expedia.
So the inn is more than 4 rooms, I think?
So it's more than 3 rooms. 4 or more rooms is an inn.
Okay. All right. Okay. We'll save our stuff. Thank you
very much. Next is Carol Waters from Australis Bed and Breakfast, followed by Richard Gervais of King Edward Bed and Breakfast.
To the worship, and it is Australis actually, it's Australia with an S, and by my accent I obviously sound Australian. Thank you for having us today. I'd like to, I owned Australis B&B, the first B&B in Ottawa since 1980. I've had 3 rooms, and I want to give you a bit of the history of bed and breakfast in the city of Ottawa to fill you all in. I was the first elected board member to Ottawa Tourism, I think way back in 1990. Sat on many, many committees there. At that particular time, they created a seat on the board of directors for Tourism Ottawa based on 57 bed and breakfast members of Ottawa Tourism. We sat on many, many committees. We represented campsites and represented small bed and breakfasts and inns at the time. So, you know, if we look at the very traditional bed and breakfast, I would hope that you all listen to us talk today and exempt us from this particular accommodation tax. We're very different. We're all individual owners. We've all got individual companies. We all serve very different things. We'll never become an association as such because we're individuals. That's why we chose this particular industry to be in. The other thing I'd like to address is we were never consulted. I never ever got this letter that was sent out in November. Nobody from the tourism industry that's implementing this tax contacted any one of my colleagues that I understand. Had they have done that, we could have had a collective meeting. Instead, the majority of the small B&Bs in Ottawa met on Sunday afternoon to try and get our point across to you here today. The other thing is, I really think we could adopt the Alberta model. I agree with the person who spoke to me prior. I just think that we're not a member of that. And I just looked at Ottawa Tourism website. It's not an inclusive website. It says, book your hotels. There's no mention of bed and breakfast at all on Ottawa Tourism website, and there never was. None of us could afford to be a member. I think when I left Ottawa Tourism, my membership was $500. Then you paid extra to have your brochure in the Tourist Information Office, and then for any advertising, whatever was going to be on a campaign, you had to pay extra. Many of us and I actually don't pay HST, I don't charge it because I keep my business under $30,000. And that's because I travel in the winter, by the way. So I think that we can't afford to be a member of this. Like you asked Ms. Harding before how much we would contribute, it's probably about $1,500. They're going to pay staff a lot more to administer this on behalf of 20 bed and breakfasts than what I'm going to contribute earning under $30,000. The other thing is I've been approached by a couple of the bed and breakfasts who are on the out-of-town area. None of their clientele is tourism. All their clientele are family and friends. One of them who called me from Manotick has never had a tourist in all the years he's ever been opened. So I don't see where this tax is going to benefit someone like me who's a small business holder. The other thing is to administer this, the burden would be unbelievable. I'd be buried in paperwork for 6 months to get all this done. So I really don't, I just really can't see it's going to work. And I think we're a declining industry. I've got a brochure here that was an association from 2007. There was 14 bed and breakfasts on there. The Glebe, Sandy Hill, Centretown. There's now 4 still operating. So that goes to show you we're not in this to make a lot of money. We're in this to give service to the general public. And anyway, on that note, I'm going to say goodbye, and if you have any questions.
Great, thank you. Next is, sorry, Councillor Englai, just to remind you, we have about 7 or 8 more people.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So the previous not Airbnb, but bed and breakfast owner, I know that's probably a dirty word for you guys, Airbnb, had indicated that they had not increased their rates over a number of years.
Right.
So what's your experience in that?
I think that each bed and breakfast appeals to a certain clientele. You know, I've always kept mine very good value for money and kept it very low end of the spectrum. I'm also in Sandy Hill. I'm not right in the downtown core. So my colleague who is on, say, King Edward, and I'm on Marlborough, he would have a premium to charge than I would.
Okay. What do you see as the tipping point, though? I mean, there's the administration piece, which we understand in terms of small business owners, but do you think that the dollar amount itself is going to turn people off of
Absolutely.
going to the bed and breakfast?
I think that increasing this particular, yes, I do believe that. And Airbnb is not a dirty word for me. I think what we've got to understand here is they are a platform for an industry. They collect that money because the client who's staying in an Airbnb does not pay the individual bed and breakfast. They pay Airbnb. They're in a much better position to collect that money than any of us small ones. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Richard Gervais, followed by Robert Brocklebank, please.
Good morning, members of council. I'm Richard Gervais. I own the King Edward Bed and Breakfast at King Edward and Laurier. I've been operating as a bed and breakfast for 25 years. It's three-bedroom B&B. I'm a typical bed and breakfast. It's a small family-owned business in a private home, and I provide breakfast every day. I want to tell you a few facts about bed and breakfasts in Ottawa. Well, to start off with, the #1 bed and breakfast site on the internet for Canada is bbcanada.com. It was created by a retired professor from Algonquin College about 20 years ago. He was the first on the net with this site, and it became the #1 site any bed and breakfast wants to advertise on in Canada. 20 years ago, there were 105 B&Bs listed under Ottawa. I went last night and I looked, there are currently 40 listed under Ottawa. This is reflective of this type of industry. Our industry is a dying industry. As Carol mentioned, this is an association I belonged to in 2005. We were 14 B&Bs in this association. 10 of them have since closed. And none of these 10 have been replaced by other B&B operators. They've closed, they become single-family dwellings. That's it. That's the way our industry is going. Most of the B&Bs in the city, if I go on BB Canada and look at the 40-some B&Bs that are listed there, by the way, approximately half of those B&Bs are not in Ottawa proper. They want to be listed under Ottawa because they're in close proximity. You have B&Bs in Wakefield, you even have one in Gananoque that's listed in those 40 B&Bs on BB Canada. But most of those B&Bs that are listed are typically 2 or 3 rooms. I went through them one by one. There's very few exceptions to that. The number of B&Bs that have more than 3 rooms on BB Canada, under Ottawa, I can count them on the fingers of one hand. So most B&B operations in the city are small family, mom and pop operations. Now, why are we declining as an industry? I think there's, one other thing I want to say about B&Bs before I address that is we do a lot to promote Ottawa. When you come to my B&B, you sit down with me, you come and sit in my dining room, I sit down with you for half an hour. I will talk about all the museums, hop on, hop off, the boat cruises, the market area, all the various activities you can do in Ottawa. And I do that because I want people to come back. I want people to realize that this is a really great city, and it works. Because a lot of people, when they leave, they wish they had stayed an extra day. And one of the reasons I do that is because about 10 years ago, I went into Chapters and I pulled out the books on all books on Canada and Ottawa to see what they said about Ottawa in terms of a city. And I hit one that said, this must be the most boring capital on the planet. Avoid at all costs. And I had heard that this existed, and that's why I went into Chapters to see if it actually did exist, and I actually did see that. So I'm doing my part in terms of marketing the city. And most B&Bs do that because we're on a one-to-one basis with individual people coming to our homes. It's not like a big hotel where it's impersonal. You get to know these people. Now, why are we declining? I think I can think of 2 reasons. One is very little income. You can't live off a B&B operation. I live off it because I had a government job, I have a pension, and the B&B is gravy for me. Someone who doesn't have a pension and they have a mortgage, it's absolutely impossible to live off this. You need to have a spouse who has income coming in, but off a B&B operation, you cannot survive. So there's little income, not enough revenue. People don't buy houses today to make B&Bs out of them because it's not lucrative enough. The other reason I think is dying is because people have come to realize that it's a lot of work. 20 years ago, a lot of people would say to me, oh, I wish I could open a B&B, I just love it. It's going to be my dream in retirement. I used to hear that comment frequently. I never hear that anymore. What I hear is that B&Bs are a lot of work. We hear it's a lot of work. No, the typical B&B in Ottawa lasts maximum 5 years. Most of them close within 5 years because it is a significant amount of work. So not only work in terms of day-to-day operations, dealing with the guests, doing my emails, doing the breakfast, landscaping, all the other things that you do around a property, but the paperwork. I have one employee. I have to deduct EI and CPP every month. I have to remit it to Revenue Canada. I have to charge HST on all my bookings. I have to remit that on a quarterly basis to Revenue Canada. Workman's compensation, I've got to remit that money to the province every 3 months. I have to do my regular bookkeeping just for income tax purposes with Revenue Canada. It's just a significant amount
If you could wrap up,
administrative work. Sorry?
Your time is up.
Okay.
So.
Okay, I'll make it very quickly. What I wanted to say in terms of, okay, sorry about that. Couldn't see the screen. In terms of size, I don't know how you got to 40, 45 B&Bs. That really surprised me when you said that. I think it's more in the neighborhood of 20 to 25. Typically 3 rooms each. We're looking at about 75 rooms. I went on Ottawa Business Journal. I looked at last night, the 20 biggest hotels in Ottawa. Number 20 is the Marriott on Dalhousie. It has 280 rooms. All the B&Bs would not fill 2 floors of that hotel. So we're a very small segment of the market. And if we have to pay this tax, it's not one person paying it on behalf of all the B&Bs. It's 20 individual people representing 20 B&Bs that have to go through this administrative burden. I think it's too much. The government of Alberta decided that it was sensible and right to exempt small B&Bs from their hotel tax. I would ask that City Council do similarly and pass a motion to that effect that small B&Bs are exempted.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm sorry for going over.
Okay, Robert Brocklebank, followed by Angela Keller-Herzog.
Good morning. I believe that members of the committee have received my written submission, and if I may quote from myself, I recognize the importance of tourism to Ottawa and support the idea of promoting Ottawa as a tourism destination. Nevertheless, I consider that the proposal before you on introducing a municipal accommodation tax is unwise, both in its timing and in its particulars. The current arrangement, in which a voluntary fee is collected to support tourism destination marketing, ends December 31st. However, there's nothing in the briefing material to suggest that the hoteliers who have been soliciting the fee have refused to continue for a month or 2 into the new year. As far as I can see, time is not of the essence here, so I ask you to take time to consider the implications of what is proposed. The documentation before you proposes that a new tax be instituted, but that the city contract out to a private body, the Hotel Association, the collection of the money, the auditing of the process, and the enforcing of payment in the name of the city. Is this a first? If you're contracting out tax collection, let me be first in line to handle all that cash on your behalf. The proposed new tax would apply to accommodation providers who do not have hotels. You could say they compete with established hotels. There's nothing in the briefing material to indicate that those business people were consulted in the run-up to today's deliberations. And if they had been consulted, I imagine that some of them would not be keen to hand over all their commercial information to the Hotel Association, no matter how fine and upstanding our hoteliers are. The idea of commercial confidentiality seems to have been overlooked. If the Hotel Association is to act as a tax collector for the city, surely they need to hire staff and incur other expenses to do so. Let's imagine that the association charges 3% of total revenue to cover costs. An extremely low figure, in my opinion. Let's further imagine the total tax take. The rate is going up from 3 to 4% on room rentals, and the tax applies to accommodation not included in the voluntary system. A conservative estimate would be that the tax would yield $9 million. That would mean the Hotel Association should receive $270,000 for its services. I repeat, that's a very reasonable sum. But if the city is to contract with an outside organization to the tune of $270,000, is not the normal practice to seek competitive proposals, or at least to do some sort of comparative shopping? There is no suggestion of such action in the briefing material. I believe the proposal before you is ill-timed and ill-advised. And as a final shot, I suggest that the application of HST to the municipal accommodation tax must be an indication of the degree to which this whole proposal is half-baked. Just imagine how thrilled a visitor from Moose Jaw or Maniwaki or Manila would be to see that he or she is paying tax on tax. I call on you to reflect further on the proposal before you. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Thank you. Angela Keller-Herzog, followed by Judith Slater, and then Kevin Benner, and then George Newfield, and Pamela Scaife. Good afternoon.
Hi. Where's my mouse there? Here it is.
Okay, let's see if I've got this set up. How do I make things go forward? Okay, I realize you've already had a long meeting, but I'm under the clock, so I can't go on. Right. So, space bar at the arrows. Oh, good. So what I'd like to do is support what my fellow B&B proprietors have put forward. I think we really feel a bit overrun. This has been happening very, very fast, and I'll try not to repeat all the points that they're raising. So I'd like to ask 5 questions and 3 suggestions. I'm sorry, my name is Angela Keller-Herzog, and I'm the proprietor of Angela's Bed and Breakfast. I'm a bit tired because I was up quite late doing this presentation and then had to get up for breakfast and all that jazz. But it's kind of fun to be able to speak to our industry too. So my questions, the first question is, why has there been no public consultation? We got before passing a new bylaw, and especially where there's a new tax, we got the letter, I got the letter on the 21st of November, and then on the 23rd of November, the Ontario regulation came down, and on the 27th of November already, the city staff had a draft bylaw. So, I mean, somebody must have known something was coming down, and we could have been consulted, as was the Industry Association. I think that the timeline is looking at a technical briefing for us on how to put this in place the week of Christmas, and then somewhere between Christmas and New Year, there's going to be a contract put in place for the tax collection, and then on January 1st, badang, we're going to start collecting. Like, this is a little bit breakneck speed, and we don't understand why there couldn't be some time. My second question is, why has there been no discussion with 50% of the affected accommodation providers by the city's own numbers, like all the small fry, on how this hotel tax will be implemented? Like, I think that there's lots of different options. So we don't usually think of the HST as a kindly and gently implemented tax, right? It's kind of a bit nasty, it has teeth, they have fines, but they have an exemption for small businesses that gross less than 30,000. The HST regime provides for a simplified or quick method. So there's ways of dealing with administrative burden, and it bears discussion. And to just have like one bingo technical, here's how it is, week of Christmas is like, whew, it's bit harsh. So I commend Councillor Chernochenko for having his motion in terms of a more staged implementation. One of my concerns is, well, if I'm taking bookings for 3 months forward, and I've got it in writing for, you know, Mr. So-and-so is coming and your price is going to be this plus 13% HST, and then you show up and I charge you an additional 5% tax. Well, we're at the lower end of the market. People are price sensitive and people don't want to be ripped off. So hidden taxes, that's going to result in bad reviews, which means I'm going to eat this tax. Okay, question 4. Why do the current documents not tell us what will be happening with the new city revenues and an estimate of how much that will be? So if you had the time, which I know you don't because you've been dealing with the whole big mother city budget, if you read the provincial regulations that came down, they're all concerned about instructing the city, which is levying this new hotel tax, to make sure that you revenue share with your tourist entity, right? That's the direction of the regulation. But I think that what's happening here in Ottawa, and it's not quite written down very clearly, is 100% of the take is staying with the tourist entity, and except for maybe 3% that the hotel association is going to take as a contract to administer. So in terms of what the numbers are, and again, because I'm tired, mental math is not my forte, I tried to calculate it. So if the tax is being raised from the 3% DMF to 4%, and we used to get 9 million per year, so maybe let's say 10 for 2015, so that's about $2.5 million per year, plus the city would be collecting from Airbnb. So what we're saying is that there's at least $2.5 million per year that I would have expected to be city revenue that's actually sticking in the tourist entity. So I think that's not made clear at all in the documentation we've seen. And furthermore, as a private little business that's not represented by the the Hotel Association, which is really the Hotel Lobby Association, why are we setting them up as a tax collector with a service contract, which is probably worth in the neighborhood of $300,000 to $500,000, I would say, based on the notional number of 3%. So it's a sole source contract that you folks are deciding by your recommendation, and this has not been made explicit. So you can read my suggestion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You're well over your time now. Any questions? Okay, thank you. Our next presenter is Judith Slater from Second Wind, followed by Kevin Benner. No. Oops. Welcome, Ms. Slater.
Good afternoon. My name's Judith Slater. I am co-owner of a small bed and breakfast that started May of this year. We have 3 bedrooms. We mainly have families, visiting family. We have small business people working in Ottawa, and we have tourists. Those are our 3 sets of types of people that come to our smaller bed and breakfast. 2 questions. My first question to you has there been any tracking of business closures in other provinces who have adopted this sort of tax? My second question is, has any research been done to show how these businesses specifically have benefited or improved due to this tax? I'm so new to the business that I don't know what the impact is, and I'm not sure if the research is there, but I have concerns about this tax. I don't agree with it. I think it's an onerous tax on small businesses like myself.
Okay. Do you have anything else to present?
That's it. Thanks.
Okay.
I
Any
kept it short and sweet. Is that all right? Any questions?
Nope. Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Next is Kevin Benner from Benner's Bed and Breakfast, followed by George Neufeld of Ashbury House B&B.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to the council for listening to us today. I don't have much to add to my colleagues. I just want to support basically what they've said up until now. And just say that before implementing this tax, I just think that we have the right to request that some thought be given to what this will do to the small business players in this sector in Ottawa. Because I feel that painting small businesses with the same brush as large hotels and the mammoth corporate player that is Airbnb will be nothing but harmful to us, the little guys. The added administrative burden placed on us individually as small businesses will be disproportionately high compared to any other player in this sector. These businesses I'm talking about, small bed and breakfasts, are almost certain to be sole proprietorships. So you're talking about one person who is already managing the entire business basically on their own. And then adding a monthly task of accounting and remittance of this tax won't be just a simple matter of handing it to the accounting department. It's going to be somebody who already has a significant workload to deal with. I also feel that the proposed amounts and timelines of the penalties for non-compliance, you got a situation where whether due to a simple accounting error or if the B&B owner is either somehow required to be away for a time or is incapacitated for a period of time, it could result in a small infraction. That small infraction could actually be an existential threat to a small business like us, where it would be almost negligible to a hotel or Airbnb experiencing the same infraction. As has been discussed already before, the price of a bed and breakfast is inherently a bundled price. It includes services that are generally charged separately by hotels, separately in ways that would not be subject to this tax. So either we're forced on the one hand to collect a tax on items that would normally not be taxed, or we then have an even heavier burden of teasing apart elements in our accounting that we would never have had to deal with. In closing, I'll just say that as other B&B members owners have mentioned here before, I don't think any of us really think so either the OGHA or Ottawa Tourism have necessarily had our interests at heart. We don't really feel represented by them. Certainly the fact that we can't become members is a significant factor in that. And I would back up also the claim that we haven't up until now seen anything to suggest that there are any direct benefits. There may be indirect benefits simply just from the increase of tourism overall in the city, perhaps. But what does that mean to our bottom line? I actually think at this point it's fair to say, just my guess being having been an owner for 8 years, I would say that the benefit I've received personally would be significantly less than 4% of my yearly bottom line. So in closing, I'll just say I'm not against being taxed in general. Actually, I love taxes. The pooling of resources on behalf of the common good is an essential part of successful democratic government. I just want to be shown where that pooling of resources is going to benefit everybody who's contributing. Thank you very much.
Okay, any questions? Thank you. Okay. Next is George Neufeld from Ashbury House, then Pamela Scaife.
Well, it's becoming good afternoon rather than good morning. Mr. Mayor, councillors, thank you for giving B&Bs somewhat of a special attention here. I really appreciate that. I think some of you may have seen my email that I distributed yesterday, and I'll echo those points and elaborate on a few of them, perhaps. In terms of administrative burden, I think the previous speaker nailed that right on the head, so I don't think I need to talk about that one. In terms of the benefits that we're likely to derive from Tourism Ottawa campaigns, I would say in our case it would be pretty much zero. We operate I'm a co-owner with my wife, Ashbury House B&B in the Glebe. Our guests come from, as a result of Carleton University, guests that Carleton has, bringing their kids to Carleton. We have a lot of medical students. We have a lot of people with foreign affairs. We have people from embassies. We have people in the community that are visiting relatives from abroad and so on. And we have government. No, I mean, somebody mentioned Grey Cup. Well, I would say, yeah, we did have Grey Cup guests that had not been previous guests, but they were only because they knew about Grey Cup and they reserved about a year in advance. But most of our guests 70% of our guests are repeat and referrals, and as a result of presence and reviews on the website. So I don't expect our particular B&B to benefit at all from anything that Ottawa does. In terms of paying, the point's been made that, B&B guests would be paying an undue proportion of tax because our rates include a number of other services. And I don't know how, whether it's 25%. I could easily argue 50% because breakfast often ends at 11:30. My wife loves talking to people, but people come for the experience. And if you were to count her time that she could be earning elsewhere, I mean, she enjoys it, obviously, but I wouldn't stop at 25%. How are we doing for time? We got another moment? I think the impact on guest relations in a B&B operation is very different because we actually face the guest. Airbnb accommodation providers, they can shrug it off saying, well, Airbnb agreed to the tax and they collect it centrally, so they just shrug it off. In the case of hotels, it's the front desk that have to take the heat. Whereas in B&B case, we are actually dealing directly with the guest. I guess the other thing about the proposal in terms of, I think I saw somewhere $500 per day penalty. I mean, that is worse than Canada Revenue Agency. I mean, that's unbelievable on a 30-day monthly payment. HST at least has a 3-month period, and yeah, they ding you, but I mean, it's not even close to what you're talking about here. So, bottom line is, I hope that you can see fit to make an exemption for a very small sector. It probably represents about 1% of the revenue that would be collected. And if worse came to worse, I would say, don't apply 4%. Absolutely, bring it down to maybe 50% of that. Okay, thank you.
Great.
Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions? No, thank you very much. Our next speaker, our last speaker is Pamela, Scaife.
You got it.
Welcome.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
I'll make it really quick. Mayor Jim Watson, you asked about why Airbnb should have the tax and not the regular B&Bs. I think that's a fantastic question. When Judith and I opened Second Wind Ottawa in May, we were 100% on Airbnb, and we fully agree that this 4% should apply to the Airbnb providers. We started on Airbnb because we wanted training wheels. We wanted to we wanted to join the adults at the big table and become a true B&B, which is what our next plan is. I can tell you now that I've done it for several months, Airbnb, we didn't have to do the marketing. We've had an 85% occupancy rate from the get-go because we didn't have to do the marketing. We haven't worried about payments. We never talk money with the clients. We haven't had to buy extra insurance because Airbnb provides it, and they provide support. We don't have to provide breakfast. I don't make the beds every day, and I don't clean the bathrooms every day because with Airbnb, you only do that when they leave. So now that we're to transition, we are going to be doing the marketing, the payments, the increased insurance, no support except for ourselves, and a much higher level of service. And why are we doing that where it's going to be a lot more work? Because we really want to be part of the community, not just simply a moneymaker in the city. We've always been community-minded, those of you who know us, that's always been. On top of all that, Judith and I still have to work outside the home. And that's fine, that's a decision we've made. But we feel that the true B&B owners not be taxed at this rate, or at least there be some sort of gradual addition to it. Any questions?
Any questions? Great, thank you.
Okay.
Just a question to Mr. O'Connor on the issue of Airbnb, and I know Councillor Eglai is going to move a motion because I think there's a number of very good points that have been raised by members of the public today, and I think we need to get those questions answered before council next week. But on the issue of Airbnb, if there was an exemption for B&Bs, could we still proceed and tax Airbnbs?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. So the tax applies on the service providers. So the service provider through the Airbnb would also be required to pay that tax, the individual homeowners.
Sorry, I'm not clear on that, because if Airbnb is taxed, Airbnb, the corporation, would remit the taxes, not the homeowner.
So it's actually the individual homeowner, and then the Airbnb would just be the tax collector for us, just like the Ottawa-Gatineau Hotel Association.
Right, but I guess my point is, though, that if there was a move to exempt B&Bs in Ottawa, could we still proceed with taxing Airbnbs?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, I got a different answer about an hour ago. So okay. And with respect to the issue that Councillor Eglai is going to raise, my understanding is that Mr. O'Connor and I guess our finance staff, you've been taking notes and I've heard some of the concerns. One of the issues is the transition period over Christmas is not great. The issue of the number of rooms, like clear, is if you have over 3 rooms, are you an inn? Or what's the threshold under the Ontario legislation? Does anyone know that? Legal?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, just a clarification there on your previous question about whether we, B&Bs, whether we can still charge the tax. So it would essentially extend to the Airbnbs as well. If we exempt the B&Bs, then the Airbnbs through the Airbnb service provider also be exempted. So there is an issue.
Okay, we're back to the original response I was given. So, all right, well, we have some work to do, obviously, on this file. And I'll ask Councillor Eglai to bring forward the resolution or direction to staff so that we can deal with this over the course of the next week.
So very simply, my request or my motion is a motion of referral to council, and not deferral. The clerks correct me on that. It would be referral to council to allow staff to look at A, the Alberta experience where there is an exemption granted, B, to, I think, that was just asked. We recently have made a distinction in the city between an Uber car and a taxi, saying they're not the same thing. And there are a lot of similarities between what Airbnb does and what Uber does versus a taxi driver and a bed and breakfast. So if we made that distinction, I think we should at least take the week and have a more fulsome response as to whether or not the same sort of distinction can be made for bed and breakfast operators, or what we'll call purebred bed and breakfast operators. Thirdly, I think if staff could get back to us as to whether or not, and I don't want to interfere with, I think it was Councillor Moffat's direction, but if the 60 days or Councillor Chernchenko's motion, get back to us as well as to whether 60 days is the upper limit, or could it be 90 or 120 days to allow a transition period should this be passed in its current form. Those are the concerns that I heard that we need answers to, I think, as part of the referral. I'm open to friendly amendments if people think there are other things that we need answers to before we make a decision on this at council.
Okay, Councillor Blais, I had you for staff questions.
Yeah, I guess my question might seem small now if we're going to refer it, but just from a pure transparency perspective, if I go to book a hotel room on Expedia, is this being lumped into the price, or is this going to be shown as a separate line so that I know that I'm paying this tax?
I can speak to the experience with Airbnb because we have been in discussion with them in terms of what this is going to look like. First, it's important to note that the regulation requires any accommodator to indicate a line item in terms of the municipal accommodation tax. So that means they must break it out. So if you're going through that experience, you will see that online in terms of the municipal accommodation tax. If you're getting a physical receipt, there has to be a line item that addresses it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor El-Shantiri, please.
So since we are going to wait obviously till the next council meeting, there's some question I'd like to, if you can provide us from now till then, if it's possible. What is the Alberta model we heard time and time again? Also, when we talk about the bed and breakfast, we really like to know the exact number. When you go on Google, it shows 52 in total, but we're not sure how many of them in and how many is bed and breakfast. I think that would be helpful. But if I'm looking at the whole business, we talk about $10 million, what is the portion for the bed and breakfast going to be contributed to that $10 million? Do you know it now, or you might have to bring it to us? I'm just wondering, because you talk about less than 1% of the whole. So what number is $100,000 we're talking about?
That's my guesstimate, that it would be less than 1%. Just to put a bit of a caveat around that, it will depend on the number of room nights that are sold and the number of folks who are participating, but less than 1% is what's projected.
Yeah, we always talk about fairness and benefit to the overall. I strongly believe there is a benefit to the whole city, to the whole spin, actually, when we bring people to Ottawa. It doesn't matter who you are. Even if you're a small business, small restaurant, taxi driver, whatever you are, you'll benefit from this. But we just want to make sure to understand what are we really looking at from now till the December 13, because clearly even the folks who own that business didn't have enough time to digest it. So maybe that would give us a little bit of room to breathe. I will support the referral, Mr. Mayor, and if any question or any answer we can have from staff beforehand, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Chernyshenko, please.
Yes, thank you. I will support the referral quite simply because there are just still so many unknowns. I'll be blunt. At the moment, I'm leaning towards wanting to simply exempt the very small number of true B&Bs that exist here. The amount of trouble to them and to us as a city administration for minimal benefit just doesn't seem worth it. But in order for me to make that kind of decision and even consider such a motion, I really would be helpful to know just how many still operating bed and breakfast do we have? What would we define? What sort of definition would we use as a true B&B? The obvious one that's already been raised is could we discern from true B&B and Airbnb? And really, what will it cost the city to administer that portion versus the revenue that we would actually get from those true B&Bs? That's all information I'd like to have in order to make that decision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Monette, please.
Thank you. One of the comments that was mentioned more than once was lack of consultation or no consultation. Can you clarify what consultation had taken place with these groups?
We spent a lot of time with Ottawa Tourism and the Ottawa-Gatineau Hotel Association, as well as reaching out to the Ontario Federation of bed and breakfasts, their association. There is no local association here put together of the bed and breakfast, so it was really a one-off conversation. And when the notification was sent out in terms of what we were thinking about or contemplating today, they were welcome to reach out to us. I believe there were about 160 notifications that were sent, and I heard from about 5 bed and breakfasts on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Monette. Councillor Taylor, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. I'd support the referral motion as well. I think for all the reasons that we've heard, there's a lot of questions left to answer about this. I did want to pick up on a thread that Councillor El-Shantiri mentioned, though, and it extends, I think, maybe beyond our staff to the Ottawa-Gatineau Hotel Association and to Ottawa Tourism. So one of the presenters had said, I think, or perhaps 2 of them had said, you know, we can't join the Ottawa-Gatineau Hotel Association. So I'd like to hear from the Ottawa-Gatineau Hotel Association on that, what their plans are. It seemed like they were, from the response, you know, things are on the table. It seems like they're willing to have that discussion. I'd like to know what the answer to that is. One of the other presenters said, I've never been invited to join Ottawa Tourism, and you know, I don't know that it would be appropriate for Ottawa Tourism to invite people to join, but I thought I'd take it upon myself to go and look and see if I could join. And their memberships rates, it says, is there a fee to become a member? On their website, it says, take a look at our membership rates, and the page is a 404 page not found. So I'd like to hear from Ottawa Tourism on what they charge or would charge the B&Bs to be members. I sense that. I was pretending. Yeah.
If I might indulge, prior to my colleagues coming to the table, in the communication that was sent to the folks across the city, we did indicate that they would receive a free membership to Ottawa Tourism. So that is absolutely on the table, and that's being offered to everybody today.
Anything else on the item? Just yeah, we're going to refer all of the motions, the direction to staff, and it's moved by Councillor Aglai that FEDCO refer the staff recommendation motions introduced at the FEDCO meeting of December 5th to Council for consideration. Just a couple of observations. There was a little bit of a mixed message. Some B&B people said, well, we don't get any tourists. I find that interesting because, you know, I think people come to cities and they stay at B&B or Airbnbs because they are tourists. I suspect some do go to weddings, but when you're coming into a city as a visitor, you're a tourist, you know, and you go off. One of our representatives said, you know, they offer shuttle service to the Canadian Tire Centre. That's being a tourist. And I think, you know, there was lots said about Ottawa-Gatineau Hotel and Ottawa Tourism, but in their defense, they've been collecting the marketing fee on a voluntary basis for years, with no problems, fully audited, number one. Secondly, it's not a level playing field because they don't have every hotel. There are outliers that go and benefit from the marketing that Ottawa Tourism does around North America, but they don't pay a nickel into it. So the reason why I think there's support in the tourism industry, and this is strange that a business association is supporting a tax, is because it does level the playing field to the point where everyone now will have to pay. Now, in terms of the, you know, number of rooms and beds and so on, we're going to have to get that clarified and find out a little bit more on what the answer is to the question, if we exempt B&Bs, do we have the legal ability to not exempt Airbnbs? And my understanding is the Airbnb number is approximately $300,000 that would come in. So that's a big hit, you know, $300,000. And we also have some lack of clarity as to how many B&Bs there are. You know, is it 15 or is it 40? We need to find that out, and I don't think we should, you know, take lightly the fact that Airbnbs, you know, have been working with our staff, as I understand it, to come up with a reasonable package that they're paying their fair share, because they're in an unlevel playing field with the hotel industry, who has to pay full, you know, commercial insurance and business tax. and the like, and yet Airbnb is in and disrupting that industry. I'm not saying that's good, bad, or indifferent, but it's just a fact of life, and I think there's a desire on the part of the industry that there be some level playing field. Now, can we, I don't know what the Alberta model is, because I'm not sure if Alberta has a hotel tax, but that's something we'll have to find out as well. And I don't know if they're going to be taxing Airbnb, so we need some answers. This is one of the great things about municipal government. You can have this push and pull at these committee meetings, and I thank the members from both the hotel industry as well as the Airbnb or the B&B community for bringing up some legitimate points that we'll have to get answered before we deal with this at council next week. So we'll put the motion forward that this matter be referred to council. Carried? Thank you. Notices of motion. Do we have any notices of motion? No. Inquiries? Any written inquiries? Other business? Adjournment. Carried. And our next meeting is February 6, 2018. Meeting adjourned. Merci.